Welcome to iPad Pros, the show all about using your iPad to be productive and get work done. I'm Tim Chen, host of the show.
In general use cases, OLED with Nano-Texture is going to be indistinguishable from glossy 90% of the time, and the 10% of the time where it really counts, it's going to do the work to actually make it worth it, to be very different from a glossy display in the best ways.
Welcome back to another episode of iPad Pros. Wes was first on the podcast back in January for episode 189. He's back this time to discuss the new M4 iPad Pro. He got the 13-inch M4 iPad Pro with 1 terabyte of storage, cellular, and Nano-Texture in space black. I was very glad he got the Nano-Texture option because this is something I was so curious about, and we chatted at length about to just kind of see, is this an option that you may want to consider on your next iPad? As a reminder, you can support this podcast over at patreon.com/iPadPros or by subscribing in Apple Podcasts. By supporting the show, you'll get early access to both iPad Pros and Vision Pros. My great thanks to everyone that supports the show. Another great way to support the podcast is by leaving a review in Apple Podcasts. My thanks to everyone that's left a review. With that, here's my discussion with Wes, all about the new M4 iPad Pro.
Welcome back to the podcast, Wes.
How's it going? I mean, it feels like it was just yesterday, but I mean, I just talked to you about Vision Pro in February and iPad shortly before that, and here I am again, another iPad. It's Apple's kicking down the doors and stealing our wallets, I think.
They are. Well, yours at least. I've held off for now, as we'll talk about. This new M4 iPad Pro is now out and available, and it looks very appealing as an upgrade from an M1, as you were on.
Well, I was having to explain to my girlfriend. I was just like, look, normally I don't buy stuff like this in this frequency, but these are both 18 months to 2-year devices. Another iPad or another Vision Pro isn't going to come out in December. I mean, I hope not anyway, but we'll see what Apple does there.
Yeah, you made it. You made it 3 years with the M1. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yes, I'm upgrading from the 12.9-inch M1, 1 terabyte with cellular.
Yeah, and I'm holding off for now. My biggest temptation, I guess we'll talk about it a little bit, but is the 11-inch M4 iPad Pro to use kind of in complement with my 12.9 M1, which I still think is a great iPad, and I think it'd be fun to replace my 10.5-inch 2017 iPad Pro with a small modern one, and I'd get more use out of that perhaps.
I've heard of people doing this, and I just can't fathom it. Especially now with how good the displays are, it actually makes it harder for me to use my iPad Mini. And I still use my iPad Mini. I drag it around everywhere. It fits in my shorts pocket as I walk around the house. So it's still definitely my home tableting device, but that iPad Pro is so tempting to pick up now. And having both a 13-inch and an 11-inch feels too redundant to me, especially with how light the 13-inch is now. So it's gotten to the point where if it's not going to be an iPad Mini, I'd rather just be down to one iPad. But we all know that when Apple announces the iPad Mini, I'm going to buy it too. So
yeah, so the 11, it still feels like, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot less unwieldy. Like, I know it's lighter and thinner, and weight is a huge factor for this and usability. But is it still a bit unwieldy being a large screen? Like, it feels like twice the size screen real estate.
Someone mentioned this on Mastodon, and I forget who, maybe Mike from Relay FM, but basically it's the torque issue. You're putting too much. It's like a lever action on your wrist. So because the iPad is so big, the weight is all being brought down by gravity to the one side, and you're having to fight against that. Whereas the 11-inch, it's not extending outward as far, and it's also got that different aspect ratio, which is thankfully only on the 11-inch, because if the 13-inch had that aspect ratio, it would be enormous and impossible to hold. But I think it just has that going for it. It's just because it's larger. There's nothing you can do about that. It's always going to have that kind of lever action on your wrist. So it's definitely a two-handed device. But I've actually got a couple of ideas that I might execute on soon to help with that. And again, it's going to damage my relationship with the iPad Mini, but I'll find places for all of them, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll be curious to hear about your explorations with that. But yeah, that's why the 11-inch seems very tempting. And as we'll talk about, you got Nano-Texture. An 11-inch with Nano-Texture seems like a great kind of outdoor reading kind of device and more mobile from what the 13-inch is,
I think you're the only problem with you is going with 11 and the former 12.9, because if they were both the same generation, which would be an ungodly impact on your wallet.
Yes,
but
which I
if
did
they were
for the second generation. I had both 2017 iPad Pros, and I loved working on them side by side. And I would use Universal Clipboard to copy between the two. I had a Bluetooth keyboard that paired the 2 or 3 devices, and I would just switch whatever input I was working on, and it was a glorious time.
Don't you wish Apple allowed universal control between iPads? I don't understand why that's a limitation.
It's so weird. I would love that. I'd love to have an iPad sitting next to my main iPad on just a stand and use my trackpad, the mouse over, and keyboard. That'd be great. Yeah.
For me, it would just be too difficult, because I would look at that 11-inch with the M4 and want to do everything there, because I know it has the better display, it has the better processor, and I would never touch the 12.9-inch. I wouldn't be able to reconcile that. Yeah, I definitely want to get into Nano-Texture, because that's a whole thing. I feel like everyone's got it wrong, and it's so annoying as someone who has it in here in my house.
So yeah, we will dig into all that. But yeah, I really think it'd be interesting to add an 11-inch, because the trade-in value I looked for my iPad Pro M4 or M1 is $510, $540, which is like a quarter of the price I paid 3 years ago, which is not terrible, but still like I would rather hold on to that iPad for that value. And the display still seems really nice, and it'd be kind of just more interesting to me to add rather than replace,
So I have a question for you. So I wrote a story recently about the iPad as a Mac replacement. And
yeah.
I think some people found it a bit of an offshoot of a story, because they were expecting to go in and learn about the software. But I feel like the software has been talked to death, and I don't want to dig into iPad OS and a story so close to WWDC. So I dug into why people might choose an iPad over a Mac because of the hardware. Aspect I wanted to dig into and focus on from a hardware standpoint was this concept called a naked robotic core. And I feel like it's been a thing that's rattled around in the back of my head for more than a decade now. It's something I've heard for a very long time from Apple's side of things, but I ran a poll, and I don't have enough of following to get too many responses, but it was still about 50-50 of who heard of that term before and who hasn't. So I want to ask you, have you ever heard the term naked robotic core, and do you understand what it applies to?
Have I listened to John Syracuse
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. From the 5x5 days, I believe, is what I first heard of that. Yeah.
I think circa iPhone 5 is when he first.
And this concept of the naked robotic core is exemplified with the iPad Pro, especially. You have this thin slab of glass that's got magnets on the back, and you can mount this thing on what we now have charging stands back now, which is great. I've got mine just in a 12 South hover bar tower type thing next to my external monitor. So it's now in desktop configuration, where it's acting as a secondary monitor to my big screen, with an external keyboard and trackpad. And then it can go in the laptop mode, or you grab the pencil, it's in tablet drawing mode, and you can hold in your hand. And so I totally get this concept here. And
so for those listening, this is one of those esoteric terms. I wish I could just go into a web search and find the origin, but there is none. Nobody knows really where it started. It just kind of came into the lexicon, and it comes and goes. I do remember it floating around heavily when the iPhone 5 was introduced, and that was supposed to be important, and that's when Samsung DeX was becoming a thing, and the idea that your phone could be the everything computer. But I think the iPad actually has become this device because you need something that works really well on its own. And while, yes, phones obviously work well on their own, most of the world gets their computing done on a phone. I think the iPad does an even better job because of its size and its size class and its computing abilities and its ability to run desktop class apps. So the iPhone, it's kind of this weird graph of what computing needs do you have that you can replace a Mac with X? And the bottom of the graph is you can replace a Mac with an iPhone. The middle of the graph is you can replace a Mac with an iPad. And the top of the graph is you need a Mac. And what people seem to always misunderstand is when I'm talking about this, I'm never going to suggest that everyone can do everything on an iPad, because that is just not true. And it never will be, likely, because there's always going to be space for that heavy duty computer. And if you guys listen to, well, I don't know when this is releasing, but it was a recent episode I recorded for the Apple Insider podcast. William Gallagher, my co-host, asked me, so what is this concept? Isn't it Steve Jobs who came out with the idea of a toaster fridge, where if you try to do two things, it'll do two things badly instead of one thing good? And my argument here is, it's not that. It's doing everything well. Now, it's not going to do it better than the best device you can buy in that market. The iPad Pro won't outperform a water-cooled 6-foot tall computer made for playing Destiny or something, right? Like, It's not going to outperform that, but it's good enough to be a gaming computer for emulation, streaming. I can put my PS5 on it using certain apps, right? It's a good gaming machine that's good enough, but this is kind of the concept of, it's not trying to be a toaster in a fridge, but it's trying to be an iPad, and it's good at being whatever context you give it. It can be a desktop, it can be a gaming computer, it can be a laptop, and so on. So that's kind of the idea, is it doesn't have to be the best in that market, but it is also the only computer that can do this. You cannot take a MacBook and turn it into a drawing tablet. You can't attach Joy-Con like controllers to the sides of a laptop and hold it like a Nintendo Switch, right? The iPad's the only one that can do these things, and I think that's interesting.
It's very interesting. It's part of what I love about this platform. It's unique in that way, where it is so modular. So before we dive any further into iPad land, I'm just curious about your general computing landscape now with the arrival of Apple Vision Pro. Prior, you were pretty much all iPad, and I'm curious, for your work, how many hours a day are you in the Vision Pro versus the iPad? Where's the Mac fall into play with anything that you require computing-wise these days? What's your kind of mix-up look like since the arrival of Vision Pro?
Well, fans of both of your shows would have heard me talk about Vision Pro before, but it was so early that I really didn't have a grip on what I was going to do with Vision Pro, other than this, I can work from it. That's the only... I had a question and I had an answer. Can I work from this device? Yes. Well, what does that really mean? And up until the new iPad release, Vision Pro became my long-form computer. I'm not so silly to assume that I'm going to do everything from Vision Pro, because there's certain things that just being in the physical realm is better for, right? So if I'm reviewing a product, I want to be able to hold that product, look at it, interact with it. I'm not going to do it through the pass-through of the Vision Pro. As decent as that might be, there's nothing that's going to beat my eyes looking at this device and interacting with it in real life. So there's just certain computing instances where having the iPad in front of me is better. Managing certain social media things. And it's actually, I'm having trouble explaining it in words, but Vision Pro is actually kind of a really good iPad, in the fact that in the original idea of the iPad, where it's one big app at a time, Vision Pro apps are huge. And you can make them smaller as you need and put them side by side, but you can never get them as small as an iPad app. If I want to have, X and Threads and Instagram and Mastodon on a page in front of me, it's the size of my wall. And, on an iPad, it's the size of an iPad, and all four apps can run side by side, and I can, go and touch them and interact with them that way. It's just such a different interaction paradigm that some things actually, because of the size of the display, because of the physicality of the interaction, it just works better. So for me, now with the new iPad, it's fallen down to, I'm still figuring it out, but what I'm kind of going for is my pre-shift work, my check-in stuff, everything that has to do with just, I'm jumping from one task to another very quickly. I'm mostly doing on the iPad. I'm coming in, I'm sitting down at the desk, turning the iPad on, getting into the shift. And when it's time to buckle down and write 5,000 words.
And the iPad is hooked up to an external monitor or just the iPad itself?
Oh, so the iPad at my desk is still that same desk setup. Anyone who's seen my desk before, we'll try to get a photo in here. But it's the same L-shaped desk with a studio display connected to a Thunderbolt dock, and that dock has a single cable going to the iPad. And that allows me to connect multiple accessories. We've discussed before my experiments with game streaming, which fell apart because everything in the world was happening. As soon as I decided to try this, everything started happening in Apple world, and I just never was able to get back to it. But it is possible to do this game streaming stuff from iPad, which is cool. It's something I think I'll eventually get back to. It's just time. But yeah, like all of that stuff is still set up through the Thunderbolt dock. And even with the new iPad, it's still Thunderbolt. It's the same USB-C Thunderbolt USB 4 port. Just plug it in and go. And I'll work from laptop form every now and then. I'll put it in my Magic Keyboard and go sit at the couch or sit in my room. I have a small desk in my room I like to work from sometimes. That modularity is there for a reason, and I take advantage of it. I'll go outside and sit at the picnic table. That's all fine. But yeah, most of the time, obviously, I'm going to work in my office. I've worked hard to get this office to where I want it. But just so I can hush and let you speak, the iPad is, like I said, I'm getting into the shift, jumping around tasks, getting a bunch of stuff, catching up, yada, yada. And then eventually, once it's time to buckle down, I'm going to, as long as it's not a review that requires me to be in the physical space, I'll put on Vision Pro, hop into a text document, and start writing. And that's where I'm going to do my 5,000 word essay about why you should replace an iPad with, replace a Mac with an iPad, or I'm going to dive deep into how Vision Pro works as a platform and stuff like that, because it's such a good tool for focusing that I forget the whole world and just focus on the work. And that's really nice.
That's awesome. So yeah, the Vision Pro has become the most focused device. It's interesting because the iPad, many people said, I go to the iPad for focused work, one app at a time, and the Vision Pro is that on steroids because you can focus out your environment. You can be in environments, you can change the lighting and all sorts of things like that.
It's interesting. Like I said, it's hard to reconcile because I'm having that trouble again of the iPad is such an amazing machine, and I can't. It's like picking a favorite child. I can't really pick a favorite. Vision OS is the only place I can go to get spatial computing paradigms, like the VR games, the spatial video that we're slowly getting one video at a time every couple months.
Yeah,
all that stuff is only possible in Vision Pro. I can only watch a 3D video on here. That focused work, though, I think is the most important aspect, and I can take this, just like the iPad, I can take the Vision Pro anywhere and dive straight into that work environment and put my brain into that focused mode. It's like a focus mode switch for my brain, right? And that's where Vision Pro comes in. And that's why for me, if people ask, like, do you regret getting it? Would you rather just be iPad only? Honestly, I think there's room for both because there's such different paradigms. Yeah,
and you said like all the windows are huge in Vision Pro, and that's true. But I also find I kind of like just having a bunch of windows and physically turning my head when I want to, work on that. Because for me, I can only really do one thing at a time. I know people say they can multitask efficiently. I like to have all the windows up.
It's not really a thing.
And be able to switch between them quickly and easily by not having to dig through them on my iPad. But instead just, glance over there, that's where it is. Or I've got a video rendering in LumaFusion, I'll throw it up above my head in the ceiling. Well, that does that job, in the background kind of thing.
This is why it's hard to explain because I agree with that. Like for me, my setup is pretty much a 180-degree U-shape around my office. And then if I need it, this is where it gets more specific. I don't really use my Mac for anything except for podcasting like we are now, or access to Pixelmator Pro, which is such an excellent, perfect app that I'm begging them to bring to iPad because there's no reason why it shouldn't run on an M4 iPad Pro. If they ever did that, I could probably just throw my MacBook in the trash. That's how close I am to just not needing a Mac anymore because I have this 14-inch MacBook Pro with M1 Pro, and it's such overkill for what I need from it because I just don't use it. There's so few tasks. Mostly, I need a Mac because of work. Every now and then, I'll have to write a story about a Mac OS centered thing. I need screenshots. I need access to those tools. If it was just me writing, if I was just running a blog, or if that side of things, and I didn't need access to Mac OS from a work point of view, I wouldn't have one at this point. But obviously, podcasting will always be easier. It's possible from an iPad. I've done it before. The beginning of my career at Apple Insider, I podcasted from an iPad. It just required some gymnastics,
or extra hardware like I do with the Zoom H6.
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, I don't really access the Mac directly unless I just feel like it, but it sits on a shelf, and I did that on purpose, just kind of almost a metaphor in my own office. It's in a little vertical stand on a shelf. I've actually rigged a external display, a portable one that I don't really care about. So if it burns out, it burns out. But it's this cheap little monitor that sits underneath a cabinet, and so that the clamshell MacBook wakes up if I click I have a magic mouse on my desk that's just Bluetooth to the laptop. Click it, it wakes up. My Apple Watch unlocks it. I open the view in Vision Pro, and now I have a 4K 30-foot screen in front of me, right? And that's where I get any Macking done, and that's usually a window behind me. And then to my left is my social media, to my right is Slack and utilities like music, and in front of me is Safari and drafts. So Vision Pro has that fun ability to give me that, like you said, just look at a window, circle around, here's all this stuff in front of me. It's its own physical form of multitasking. Whereas iPad, it's the classic form of multitasking, but honestly, there's a reason why windowing and that kind of stuff has existed for so long, because it works for so many types of things. I can't 4-finger swipe between open Safari windows in Vision Pro, right? And I think part of this might be a limitation of Vision Pro. I expect there's an ultimate future where a thinner, lighter, smaller Vision Pro replaces everything, but I don't think we're there yet. And until then, for me, my main computer, if anyone asks me if I had to pick, it will always be iPad, because iPad is just so much more versatile as a platform. My Vision Pro can't be everything the iPad can, and my iPad can't be a Vision Pro. So that's why they coexist for me.
Yeah, they are unique platforms and very special in their own right. And yeah, I love my Vision Pro, especially like for the iPad. It's great for quick interactions. I just open it up. I need to do this thing in like 2 or 3 minutes, and then I'm done. Vision Pro, it's for those longer computing sessions for me, where I'm editing podcasts there now, and it's a really great experience doing that.
That's the problem with Vision Pro as a platform, and people will hear me criticize Vision Pro. It's out of love. I love this thing, but I just wish it could be better in certain ways, and I'm excited for WWDC for Vision OS 2, but it's just that's another part of it. I can just pick up an iPad, Face ID's unlocked it, I'm in whatever interaction I need to be in. But Vision Pro, there's such a barrier to entry. I have to pick it up, put it on, manage the battery, and wait for it to log in and get my bearings, make sure my windows are in the right place. If they're not, readjust them, set up the volume and everything to where I want it to be, and then get to where I am. There's so many steps before you just get there.
Yeah.
Where
it'd be quicker for me if I lived in a household without cats and babies, where I could leave the Vision Pro in a stand. But
right.
Instead, it lives in the travel case because it's expensive and I want to protect it.
Right. It's just that alone, I think, exemplifies why iPad is so different. So yeah, this isn't the Vision Pro's podcast, so we don't need to wax too poetic about Vision Pro. I just think it was important to have that discussion, if only because they both play such a important part in our computing lifestyle, and the Vision Pro is a natural evolution of iPad.
Yeah.
But here we are seeing the iPad leap over the Vision Pro again, only months after its release, and I find that interesting as a strategy from Apple.
Yeah, so it was natural, I thought, to just open with, we just got Vision Pro. I'm still using it as my primary computer, and the iPad's become kind of my secondary computer, which a lot of people, the Macs are primary and the iPad secondary, and it's kind of become that for me in a bit way. But I'm using a bunch of iPad apps on my Vision Pro, I must say. But every time I use the iPad, it's just so delightful. Like I remember every time I use the iPad, it's like, oh, this is why I really love this device. taking it off the Magic Keyboard and using it with Magic Keyboard and just the fluidity of it, and everything just feels so great to touch and use.
I'm not going to a photo shoot in a field somewhere and putting on Vision Pro to edit the photos, right? Like,
right. Yeah.
And especially if I want to show them, okay, let's turn on guest mode and do that whole hoop jumping. And all right, don't worry. I know it's 80 degrees outside. You'll sweat a little bit. Just put this over your face. And no, obviously I'm going to take the iPad and I'm going to have this big bright display to show them the photos on, and I can import all the images from my camera just by connecting a cable.
Yes.
Or inserting a USB into a dongle or a SD card into a dongle. Like, that's it. The paradigms are just so different, and that's why I find it funny. I think I wrote a story before. Yeah, I actually forgot about this. These last few weeks have been insane, but I did write a story, I think, discussing it's called "At a Crossroads to the Future of Computing: Choosing Between Apple Vision Pro and iPad Pro." So if you want to know my thoughts on this, I go into a lot of detail there. That's a good one.
Excellent.
You're fine.
And I'll link to that in the show notes there. So let's dive in to the new iPad Pro. So your model is the 13-inch M4 iPad Pro with 1 terabyte of storage, Nano-Texture, and cellular in space black. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So that's the basically identical model to what I have as the M1 variant, except for silver and the lack of Nano-Texture, of course. And the other iPad, your M1, same storage and all that, is getting passed down to your wife, I believe. Is that right?
She's my girlfriend, but she might as well be my wife. Yeah, she got the iPad Pro. This is what's so funny about this is this is our first shift in accessory compatibility. So she not only does she get the iPad Pro, but she gets every metal magnetic stand, the pencil, whatever cases I have, because none of them work on the new iPad. And I find that to be an interesting story. It's kind of a fresh start. And I know that's frustrating for some people because some of these can get pricey. I mean, realistically, a normal person that isn't me shouldn't have 20 of these stands. They should have maybe 2. And then you replace them when the magnets change. And this is the first time in, I think, 6 years that we've ever had to do this. So I'm not complaining. I know some people might. This accessory discarding is always annoying. And what do you do with these things if you find one and it's like it's just this aluminum slab you just own now? I guess you'll go recycle it or something. But yeah, no, she got the iPad. I actually have her pretty good desk setup downstairs. But one thing that we like this, and this gets into iPad OS, and I think we can have a discussion there because there's a lot of discourse around iPad OS right now. But one thing she's noticed is she's coming from an iPad Air 5, and so that's not iPad Air 5, iPad Air 4. So that's pre M1. It doesn't support Stage Manager. I had her a desk setup downstairs where the iPad was in front of a keyboard and a monitor was connected to an Apple TV, and that was her desk. And it worked. She mostly she had the Apple TV to watch TV on while she would goof off on her iPad, which was pretty much set up as a faux laptop, except she had a mechanical keyboard and external trackpad connected to it. So that was her setup. And if she needed to get something done, she'd reach up and tap it. She did not have Stage Manager turned on. It was just the old windowing paradigm. Problem: hook up her new M1 iPad Pro. Get her that, I gave her my old floating stand because I can't use it, and I got it all. Her desk is very nice now. It's all set up, basically a clone of what I used to have now in her space. And she's like, what is all of this? And it's Stage Manager because she's hooked up to an external monitor, and there's no other option. Now you can turn the iPad to a different paradigm. And I told her, I was like, I can do this for you, but then you'll have 2 windowing paradigms to think about. I would prefer if you could just get used to Stage Manager because it's going to force you to use it on the external display anyway. But she's not like tech illiterate or anything. She's just not a techie. She's kind of struggling with, okay, I click this thing and it opens a window and it's a smallish window. How do I get it to be bigger? Oh, you have to drag it. And how do I get windows to group together? What if I always want my apps to be full screen? Well, you always have to go and tell it to be full screen. It's just that isn't as obvious because there's no what's the word for it on macOS? Street light. It's the green, yellow, red buttons. Stoplights. anyway, there's a word for that someone's going to yell at me about, but it's there's no obvious paradigm here.
I mean, the iPad has the three dots, except it's in the middle of every window, and you can enter full screen from that and minimize.
Yeah, but those three dots, as we record today, it's really hilarious because Quentin Nelson came out with an excellent short. It's like a 2-minute video of him trying to figure out something on iPad OS. We can have this discussion now or later, whenever you want. But just for this video, he is attempting to. It's the classic thing. You have an iPad hooked up to an external display. Mm-hmm. You have an app open on the external display, like Freeform in his case. Mm-hmm. How does he have Freeform open on both devices? And it's not in the 3-dot menu. It's not in the multitasking menu. There's only one way to do it, and it's the most obtuse thing. You'd never figure this out on your own. Someone has to tell you. You long press.
Is it add another window, then move to iPad?
No, because then it would move both windows to the iPad.
No. You hit add another window,
mm-hmm.
and then on that new window, you select move to iPad.
But then it moves every available window from the app to the iPad.
It doesn't, though. I just tried this as we're talking.
Oh, well, then
I guess that's another way. You can add another window from the 3 dots on the window you're on now. I did this with Agenda just now. And then on that new window, you can say move to iPad, and it'll move that to the iPad.
I think the biggest issue is there's so many ways to do this, and none of them are obvious. That way, I think, works on Agenda, but it didn't work for him on Freeform, funny enough. Or at least the way he did it didn't work. Ultimately, he did what I do, and this is how I always do it, because I actually do this quite often with Safari. I like to have 2 instances open on both displays. You go to the icon, you right-click it or long press it, show all windows, and even if there's no active windows on that device, there will be a plus button in the upper left corner. You hit that, and that opens a new window. That's the best way to do it, but no one on earth will figure that out. You have to be shown that, I think, or you have to just fiddle around until you discover it. But like, my girlfriend would never find that on her own. It's just too esoteric, and I think that gets into the issue of iPad OS is so much better than it used to be, but there's so much room for growth, and I'm excited for its future as far as what can Apple do next. I don't want Mac OS. I don't want it to be a Mac, but I think it just needs to be a better iPad OS.
There's a lot of corners that can be routed in iPad OS for sure.
For sure. But yeah, so she got the old iPad and she's figuring out Stage Manager. That's fine. My mother, she got her first iPad. She inherited the iPad Air 4 and she's enjoying that. She's learning how to do anything on an iPad, which is very similar to an iPhone, thankfully. So she's fiddling about with some coloring books and puzzles. But so that's all fun. But for me, my setup is down to iPad Pro, iPad Mini, and the iPad Mini is really starting to show its age next to this iPad Pro. But let's get into the hardware.
Yeah, let's. So the M4 iPad Pro. Well, first off, you got black. I'm curious, how black is this? Did they make it actually black, or is this just some kind of gray?
It's on the spectrum of Apple's space gray. It's definitely, so the iPhone 15 Pro Max that I have is also space black, and that one's actually close enough to black I'd be willing to call it black. It's still a few shades lighter, but this iPad is lighter than that by a few shades, but it is still darker than the previous iPad Pro. It's nice. It's not too noticeable, but it's also one of those weird things where you never look at it anyway because the entire iPad is just a display. You'd have to flip it over to see the color.
Yeah, I've always gone silver since they went and got rid of my favorite gold iPad Pro after Gen 2. I've gone silver. I think I would this time around too.
So Sigmund, I believe is who it was, over at Mac Stories, yes. Decided that he wanted he compared it to the Siri remote, but it's the aesthetic of the MacBook Pros actually, and decided to go and remove the keycaps from 2 separate Magic Keyboards in different colorways, so he could have a black keycap set on a silver keyboard. And I just thought this was fascinating, but it also would cost you $700.
It's beautiful too. At first I thought he made a MacPad like Federico. Then it's like, oh, I see what he did there. Because I think black keys are for sure the way to go because they look so good with the backlight. You have the backlight on, it just looks better with black keys.
I wish they had the shine through keycaps that let you see the letters. This is something that third party companies have always missed out on. Keycap makers, I know it's not exciting. I wouldn't want to remove the keycaps on my iPad, but it's got to be relatively straightforward. Make some keycap options for the iPad Pro. I think that would be fun. But I would totally buy at least an alternative couple of buttons to make them different colors, to make them hotkeys visible or something. But yeah, I just found that to be a fascinating experiment. Have you so you don't have any of the new hardware, but I want to emphasize the new Magic Keyboard makes the iPad look incredibly like a Mac, and a MacBook in a lot of ways. It's like they switched the thickness. So if you look at a MacBook, all of the thinness, the display is super thin and the body is super thick. The iPad is just the opposite of that, but everything else is identical. It's this super thin keyboard body, and you open the iPad to that first stop before it becomes the cantilever floating hinge, and it looks like a little MacBook. It's really funny.
So the keyboard itself, is it actually thinner, or did they just remove some of the artificial weight they put inside there for balancing? As far as, like, I know the weight has gone down, but I wasn't sure if the thinness as well has gone down.
It's technically thinner. I'm not sure where they got the thinness from, but the overall design is just much more striking. The old Magic Keyboard had this kind of pinched, like you pinch two sides of cloth together and you get this kind of like thing where you almost like leather stitching, right? Like it's kind of a hump on the end that can just that gets ruined over time because it's colliding with everything as you carry the Magic Keyboard around. It kind of made it look, I don't know, just less squared off anyway. But this one, the edges match the iPad because it has the aluminum interior, and then on the outer surface is this rubbery material, but it's so much better cut to the fit that it just looks like you've put a sleeve around a MacBook Air or something. But even this is thinner than a MacBook Air, so it's just very funny to me to look at.
And using it, the aluminum on there, it's just a nicer feeling. Like it's been a while since I've used a Mac laptop. Like it just feels nice having it there.
It does. There's a few things like, so the keyboard didn't change. It's still the same travel, same keycaps. I think honestly it's identical. But the area around it is aluminum, including the up to the display. There's a small rubber ring around it to prevent the display from the iPad from smacking into the aluminum, I guess. But yeah, otherwise it's just this aluminum wrist rest, and it's just feels so much nicer. The material on the iPad previous Magic Keyboard was kind of grippy and would absorb finger oils really well, and it would just kind of get kind of grungy looking if you didn't clean it regularly, and it just didn't look very good. And the trackpad on that thing is tiny compared to the new one. The new trackpad is a proper size. I don't know how they did it. They fit a larger trackpad in, added an entire row of keys, and it's still the same size and shape as an iPad. And the iPad doesn't obscure the keys when it's open. So they've done some black magic there for sure.
And the actual trackpad, it is haptics now. It's not a physical button, which most will probably enjoy. I kind of like that they did a physical button back that time. But tell me about where haptics are used outside of just clicking.
It's actually really cool. And the Apple Pencil does this too. Anywhere in the system that there's haptic feedback, both the trackpad and the pencil do this now. So the best place to experience it is in lists. So grab a list item and move it up and down. So a reminders list, Apple Music, playlists, whatever. Grab the little move button with either the cursor on the trackpad or with the pencil, and just move it up and down, and the haptic feedback will feed through the vibrating engine. And it's natural, it's nice, it gives you haptics everywhere. macOS does not do this, which is weird. I think that'll happen soon, maybe. Maybe we need a new trackpad. I don't know. I think the current Magic Trackpad is still a dive board. Or no, actually, I'm wrong. You turn it off and it becomes this inert piece of glass and it feels broken. So maybe they could add these haptics to the external Magic Trackpad too. Who knows? But it's so nice, and it adds this little bit of whimsy all over the system. I notice it everywhere. it's hard to remember exactly where, but it's like all these little interactions.
So it's not just in Apple Music. Like if you're rearranging files in the Files app, that'll show up there too.
Maybe not files, but definitely like I've noticed it mostly in list items. There's other places it shows up that's not coming to me right now, but I do notice that there's just haptics throughout the system is the best way to explain it. It pops up in random places, different sliders, different clickers. Just it shows up in obvious places, but not obvious enough that I can just name them right now. But it's everywhere,
and
which is
currently
nice.
There's no settings for prominence of haptics. Is there any like 2-finger tap option in the settings or anything like that?
I mean, I immediately go and turn on tap to click, but that's the same setting that's always been there.
The same thing. Okay.
But yeah, nothing else is present. Maybe you'll be able to turn this off. Maybe this is annoying or overstimulating to some people. But right now, there's no options for it. It just exists as part of the system.
Okay. And then they went from a circular design on the hinge to this oval shaped thing. Yeah. Tell me about
It's
that.
funny. So it's the previous one had this cloak around it. This the faux leather rubber material would wrap around it in this kind of like hooded shape that warped around it as you open and close the keyboard. So when you sat down the keyboard, it would sit on that surface and not on the aluminum. Now it's just bare aluminum, and it clacks when I put it down, like on my desktop, which is just a different soundscape. I'm like, what did I just hit? No, it's the keyboard. So that's interesting. It's a different shape. The port is in a different orientation. I would definitely say I like this design better, especially when it's closed. It just looks nicer. Again, that extra fabric around it, or whatever you want to call it, that rubbery material around it, made it look, I don't know if you want to call it cheaper. It just looked more like it wasn't part of the whole design, whereas now the design is so much more uniform.
And the port being an oval, it kind of like visually matches better, right?
Yeah, it's just not. It's actually really funny. It looks kind of like Federico's MacPad. If you look at just the iPad sitting, so I have a photo in the Mac replacement article of the iPad and MacBook sitting side by side, both open vertically, so the iPad isn't in its cantilever position, and it looks kind of like Federico's MacPad, just because the way the base is shaped and that oval bottom, it's just funny looking to me.
Yeah.
I prefer this design. I like how it just kind of completes the look and feel of the iPad instead of it kind of being this weird external addition. But I also noticed that you put the iPad side by side in the Magic Keyboard, they're different. They've recalculated the angles of everything. So the angle at which the iPad opens and the angle at which it sits is all completely different from the previous Magic Keyboard.
Interesting. Okay. And does it seem to you have more different angles? Are there more angles or just different angles?
It's as adjustable as before. Am I forgetting something? Like maybe before there was only a couple like places you could click to. This one feels like you can move it to wherever you want it, as long as it's after you get out of that vertical up and down position, because you can't actually move it from there. You can't tilt it back in that position or anything. It's just perfectly vertical, which actually works in some situations. But once you push it into that like cantilever position where it's kind of hovering, it seems like you can just go anywhere with it, and that's kind of nice.
And it still does the magic trick of once you open the Magic Keyboard, the iPad screen turns on once it's opened up.
Yes, I wish they could figure out a clamshell mode, but it's still pretty nice.
Yeah. One of my wishes for iPad OS 18, which will be revealed the week after this episode goes live, I really want a clamshell mode. And how nice would it be to support the external Touch ID sensor in the Mac with those keyboards? That'd be nice.
We're so close to a lot of interesting things here. It's annoying that the Magic Keyboard is still unable to do data through that port, because being able to connect a cable through the Magic Keyboard and have it be Thunderbolt speeds would be nice, but there's got to be some physical limitation to the smart connector. That's not that.
Yeah, I'm sure the smart connector itself can't handle that kind of speed.
But I just wonder if there's any technological possibility that we'll ever see something like that? Or is that just too much I/O to go across? Even if it was just USB 3 speeds, I wonder if that would be possible.
I mean, I would love that, but personally, I just want clamshell mode. Like, let me close it and plug into my regular port. And then especially if you have an iPad Air with Touch ID on the iPad, that'd be so cool to be able to just unlock it with it closed like that,
I want more cool accessories. I understand the iPad Pro, especially the more expensive ones, are a niche of a market. You're targeting such a small marketplace. That one company tried to do it with their sad iPad stand that was also a dock. What am I thinking of? Do you remember?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I don't remember the name of it, but yeah, it was a magnetic stand that had all these ports on and stuff, and
it was so cool and immediately ruined by the fact that Apple slightly tweaked the design like a week later of the iPad and made it thinner. And I don't know, I think they gave up on that, but that's the danger of gambling with this stuff. But someone should make a Thunderbolt dock that you mount your iPad to. Like, come on. What? I understand you're targeting a couple hundred people or something. Like, it's such a small niche of a market, but that would be so cool to have like a kind of like the bridge dock for MacBooks, just to have an iPad dock that's a Thunderbolt related device instead of having a cable. Just set the iPad in it and bam, now it's a whole computer desktop thing.
My favorite new product that's come out for iPad is by Kuxiu, Kuxiu.co, and they finally replaced this Logitech charging base that charged your iPad Pro first and second generation through the smart connector. And that I bought for $59 back in the day. I had two of them. I sat them on my desk at work and just sat both my iPads there and connected over Bluetooth, and it was great. And they have a new stand, $100. They've got different variants of this, and it looks like it has, I think, 18 or 20 watt charging, so much faster than the Logitech one. And this looks like a solid product that I really want to get one of these days.
I think the smart connector on the new iPad can get up to 60 watt charging, which is interesting. I pronounce it Kuxiu, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But it's you can never tell depending on how the letters are arranged. But in any case, I've actually worked with this company. I'm reviewing some of their charger stands, and it's so funny that you mentioned this. We communicated about their new charging stands 2 weeks before the iPads were announced. And I was like, oh, sure, yeah, I use the 12.9 inch. Send me one of those. It arrives the same day as my iPad Pro 13 inch, and it obviously does not fit. And I emailed them like, so funny story. I'm moving on from the 12.9 inch. So I'm getting the correct 13 inch model to review, and I'm actually going to do a roundup. So I'm getting a few from, I believe it's either Lulu Look or one of those other companies. So Kuxiu, and then I'm checking those out, but their charging stands are really cool, but useless if you're going through Thunderbolt. But I wanted to mention real quick.
But so there's other companies that are releasing charging stands as well that use the smart connector?
Yes.
That is, yeah. I wonder if Apple opened up on this finally.
Maybe, or I think before it was just such a pile of garbage that no one ever bothered. The Logitech one was just bad, but of course that was an iPad from like 2016 or something, but it was just bad. It was too slow. It was useless. But now here we are talking about possibly Apple opening up an always on display option for iPad, and these chargers are coming out. Man, I want this everywhere.
The place where these stands work great is if you don't have a Thunderbolt set up with a big external monitor. You've got a simple desk, and you have an external trackpad and keyboard in front of the stand, and that's it. It's just a very clean and nothing desk setup.
So I actually have a plan for multiple of these guys in my home. So because I'm going to be replacing my old iPad setups. So at my desk, obviously, I previously had their stand guy without the charging, because the charging system is new, but they've always had the big floating arm, articulating arm iPad stand. So I'm going to get another one of those for my desk in my office. And the charging stand, like you said, is going to be really nice for like the small table in my bedroom, where I can have just a keyboard in front of it and have a floating iPad there. But one of the ones that I've noticed it hasn't been updated for the new iPads yet. But when it does get updated with this new charging system, it's going to be an instant buy for me because I think it solves a problem I've been trying to figure out for a long time. They have a screw-in mount that mounts your iPad to a wall onto an articulating arm, and I want that to have a power option, so I can just stick my iPad to it and get power to it, and have that articulating arm next to my bed, so you can actually fold it flat, so the iPad's just kind of sitting on the wall.
That would be nice.
Yeah, and then you lay down in bed or whatever, get comfortable, and then you pull the iPad out from the wall, and now it's just floating in front of you in space. And you can maybe pull out a keyboard to write, or so if maybe you want to do journal entries when Apple Journal comes to iPad, or you grab a controller, watch some movies, play some games. But that would be awesome. For those asking, don't worry, the girlfriend's fine with it. We do the European separate bedrooms thing, so I can do whatever I want to my bed. But yeah, so it's actually I'm excited by the idea of iPad on the wall, maybe an always on display. It'll show the clock. If Apple gives us this option, please, come on. It's so obvious. Do it.
Yeah, the always on display, I've heard it needs to get down to 1 hertz, and it's at 10 hertz now. Is that...
It may not be so this is what's so weird about software and stuff. I might be wrong. Maybe one of our listeners are the super display geeks who know everything about how displays work and have watched the iFixit videos and know about the panels, and they're like, no, it's impossible. It's 10 hertz or nothing. But my understanding is it's not a limitation based on the refresh rate of the display. It's software. Apple previously only took it down to 10 hertz because that's what was needed we're going down to reading text on a screen, but they never planned for an always on display because burn-in was going to be an issue, and other issues because you couldn't turn all the pixels off, and you're dealing with lighting zones instead of OLED, all that stuff. So now that we have OLED, the iPad Pro for that variable refresh rate has an LTPO backplane, which is what a liquid whatever backplane. It's what allows that variable refresh rate. There's no reason why it shouldn't be able to get down to 1 hertz. If there's a technical reason that I'm missing, so I could be wrong, sure, but I'm assuming that can just be flipped on in software. And because up till now, everything in iPadOS, everything in the programming logic for these displays has said, hey, 10 hertz to 120 hertz. But I don't see any reason why Apple can't change that programming logic in iPadOS 18 to say 1 hertz for always on displays. So we'll see. I think it actually is a possibility with this hardware. There's, at least from my understanding, there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah. Cool. So tell me about the weight of this new iPad Pro. This seems to me to be like the most dramatic improvement over the previous gen iPad Pro for the 13-inch.
It's kind of impossible. And I saw you pontificating on Mastodon about, well, iPads got heavier for a moment, now they're lighter again, so maybe if you're coming...
Yeah, it's interesting. I was looking over past models, and the 2018 model was lighter than the 2020, and of course the 2021 and 2020. So it was like 1.38 pounds for 2018. Then they add the fancy camera module with lighter, the extra sensor, and it got even heavier. But that mini LED, it jumped from like to 1.5 pounds. So like if someone's upgrading from a 2018 edition to this, it will be less dramatic for that person.
Less dramatic, but there's a lot of factors at play. I had that iPad series. I've had every iPad Pro since the beginning, other than M2, because it did nothing different other than hover, and I didn't care. But yeah, so looking back on that series, that was the A12Z, right, iPad, the weird one before we got to the M series chips.
The 2020 model.
Right. So, because we had the 2020 model A12Z and then 2021 with M1. Right. It was a very quick turnaround.
Yep.
But that A12Z model was interesting because it had the LiDAR system, it was
ultra wide camera. It was mainly introduced to sell the Magic Keyboard, I think.
Yes, and that one was an important one for me because it kind of set up you can really work from iPad now. Before it was kind of an idea, but cursor support and all that really transformed it.
Yeah, the Magic Keyboard in my mind with trackpad support and mouse support, that was the biggest, one of the biggest moments in iPad. Not this moment, Tim Cook. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, this one's important in different ways.
It is, yes.
But yeah, no, as far as like workability, because nothing changed about how an iPad works with this update, but everything changed about an iPad in 2020, and that's the difference. But no, as far as lightness goes, I think it also just comes down to the thinness. It's a combination of both. It feels impossible.
Yeah.
That iPad in 2020 didn't feel impossible; it just felt big.
Right.
And it felt awkward, like large iPad Pros do. This one, when I pick it up, when I look at it, it feels like it shouldn't be a computer. It's a notebook. It's a notepad with paper and pencil. It doesn't make sense to your brain. And that'll go away with time. I've only had this thing since it came out Wednesday, as we record. It's what are we, 5 days in, 6 days in? I've had time to mess with it and use it. So I have a really good experience with it, sure, but it's still in that new phase. But every time I pick it up, it's just like, how is this possible? Is that's the difference. Yes, the weights on paper don't feel too dramatically different, but it's that design and the thinness combined with the weight that really make you sit down and think, how did they do this? The way that they balanced it. They called it like a skeleton or something to make it less bendable. I think they moved the logic board to the center. The previous iPads, the logic board was on one side.
Oh,
so depending on which side you were holding the iPad, you would either be very warm or very cold.
Yeah.
I believe the logic board is now in the center, which is part of that skeleton thing. The center bracket
and the cooling system with the Apple logo.
Yeah, so that's why it's in the center. So the SoC might actually literally be in the center of the iPad, underneath the Apple logo with that copper infusion, and then it's sitting on this skeleton bracket to prevent bending the long way. Now, if you want to turn it to portrait and try to bend it, there's nothing protecting you from doing that, but that's much harder to do anyway. You have less torque. But the other way, though, yeah, you have that middle spine, and then on either side of the logic board in the center is the giant plates of battery, and that's the whole iPad. I think this design makes so much more sense than the previous ones. The previous ones, it would be logic board, battery, and then this giant ocean of battery down the middle, and that's what, and no center structure, nothing like that. That's why they were so bendy. Yeah, so this is just so much better designed. The weight distribution makes more sense. It feels more balanced. It just feels nicer in the hand. It's such a different thing.
Do you find yourself using it in ways you didn't use the other iPad because of weight? Like, are you picking it up and just using it more handheld, or is it still in the case more often?
This is where the time thing comes into play. It hasn't been long enough for me to see a lot of different, like, my computing will change with time.
Yeah.
As this new device, I get used to it. Right now, I'm still mostly using it in the same paradigm I would before. It's either in a stand, in a keyboard. But I have noticed that, yes, like, I will take it off of the iPad and mess with the Apple Pencil. We can get to the Apple Pencil 2 real quick, but the Apple Pencil Pro has really changed how I think about Apple Pencil for iPad and how I use it. And it's so silly, but it's because it's like, oh, it's always had Apple Pencil, right? Well, why now? Why is this different? Well, it feels like a physical connection between me and the iPad, whereas it didn't before. Before, it felt like a stylus. It's just this dumb thing I'm tapping the screen with that's basically a finger. I'm not really an artist. I can doodle, but I drew schematics as an electrician in the Navy on an iPad a few times. Like, that stuff was all well and good, but it felt like pencil and paper. It was just that paradigm, and that's fine. That's a good paradigm. But navigating the iPad with pencil always felt kind of like I'm going to put this thing back and use my finger. It's better. Honestly, now, if I'm holding the iPad in a way that makes sense, like if I'm just using it as a tablet, I would prefer to navigate with the pencil, because like the trackpad, you get haptics everywhere. As you hover over actionable buttons, they jump up to meet the pencil, and you feel this little tapping sensation. Ooh. And there's just all of these little things that make the iPad into such a... The way I equated it in my head is, it's like Vision OS come to life. It's in Vision OS, you feel like you're directly interacting with software in a physical space, unlike anything else. This is the closest thing I've felt to Vision OS in a computing device on a 2D display. It just feels like you're physically interacting with objects on the screen, which is really cool.
And it's the realization of what the M2 brought with hover. When I first saw hover, I was like, oh, that's a nice thing. But then they just like, this is like the full realization of what hover
plus the
can be.
haptics.
Yeah.
Yes. It's amazing.
And the click as well. Like that, I think helps bring the whole hover usability to a whole new level.
Double tap's one of those things that if it gets in the way, like, yeah, I know I can do it, but humans are so lazy, but it's just like, I don't want to do that. Like that's a whole thing I have to do. But just squeezing, to bring up the modal, squeezing to bring up menus. I was listening to Upgrade, and they were talking about the undo system with Apple Pencil Pro. And apps with Pencil Kit, there's this new undo system where if you press to bring up the modal and press and hold on the undo button, it'll bring up a timeline you can scrub through. Like, that's wild. Like, I feel like Apple Pencil Pro opens up a new interaction paradigm on iPad that we haven't seen since Apple Pencil.
The barrel roll, I think, works really nicely with hover too.
It does.
I'm not mistaken. Yeah, that's probably a combination that's good.
I think apps would be silly not to look at getting it like this. I don't think it's going to happen, but this is my imagination at play here. How cool would it be? We have apps that take advantage of the touchscreen. We have apps that take advantage of the Magic Keyboard. They know people are using the trackpad. I want apps to bake in Apple Pencil centric interactions. Like, we know you're going to, like, if you use the app with Apple Pencil, this is the cool stuff you can do with it. You know, use barrel roll to adjust this thing in this settings menu, or, you know, just stuff like that. Like, you know, you grab and drag a slider in Photomator, right? What if you could hover over the slider and do barrel roll to do a precision adjustment of that slider, right? Like, give us pencil specific interactions. And I know, again, we're targeting such as, first, you'd have to discover that's a functionality. You'd have to have the Apple Pencil Pro and the new iPads. I get it. But that whimsy and that magic is what makes apps that, rest in peace, Apollo, or, you know, things like Carrot Weather, PCalc, these guys who basically tell, like, it's like a love story that they have with the software because they put so much love and dedication into these apps. That really makes an app sing when these kinds of interactions exist. And I could see this going even further now with Apple Pencil Pro being such a useful interaction paradigm beyond just sketching.
Yeah. And one of the coolest things I saw go around the interwebs was all the different models that Apple put into the Apple Pencil Pro for when you're hovering over the screen. It'll show you a reflection of a fountain pen, the tool you're holding, or a pencil, or a water brush. And it, like, the reflection on
even the eraser
shadow is literally that object, which... Does it feel more like you're holding that object in any way? Does your mind play any tricks there?
No, and to get to feeling, and I think this gets to the next discussion for Nano-Texture, it feels like an Apple Pencil as far as that goes, as far as drawing and using. The only way I could see this changing, and I don't think the haptics in this are precise enough for this, but maybe a future model could emulate resistance with different vibration tones. Maybe that's possible with this one, who knows. But, like, I could foresee a future Procreate where you change the paper type and it changes how the haptic feedback is pronounced on the pencil.
Yeah, because when you draw on the screen, there's no haptics, right? It's just...
It's still just gliding over glass. And for everyone asking, the Nano-Texture makes literally no difference for your finger or for the pencil. It's still you're touching glass. It's not more paper-like. It's not grippy or grainy in any way. It's just glass.
Interesting. Okay. And when you click it, is it kind of like the AirPods Pro with the fake button click where it's not actually clicking?
Yeah, there's definitely, you're not, it kind of fools you into thinking you're actually clicking the pencil.
Yeah.
And it has a range. You can up and down the whole side of this thing for some reason. You can do it in a lot of different places. Because I was experimenting, photographing a lot of these effects is really difficult. And if you ever look at any of my Yeah, if you look at any of my articles I've written, especially the hands-on, where I have a couple of images of, I had to be my own hand model. So one hand's holding a camera, the other hand's holding a pencil in front of an iPad. So imagine that gymnastic. But
see, you need to do some photos from the Apple Vision Pro, obviously.
Oh, for sure. No,
that super high resolution camera.
Goodness, I wish it could do better. But that would be cool if that becomes something possible.
Right.
But
yeah,
that's a whole different tangent.
The quality just needs to get better right now. Their spatial cameras.
Absolutely.
Yep.
But as far as the pencil goes, yeah, I would keep adjusting my grip because either I would want my hands in the image or not. And a couple of them I was like, no, I don't. I just want the pencil, the modal, and the shadow. And I would scoot my hand up the side of the pencil so only the front of the pencil is visible in the image and still squeeze and bring up that modal, which is interesting. I don't think it's the entire side of the pencil, but it's definitely more than just like down at the bottom where you normally hold it, which is nice.
What have been some of the cool apps that you've found that just do support barrel roll in the new Click?
So that side of things, it's too early for that conversation.
Okay.
I haven't had a chance to dive into anything like Procreate. Even doesn't support anything. I mean, you can go in and do barrel roll in Procreate, and that's actually a better example. Like the Notes app is where you can go and see the ink pen, and I had to. This gets back to iPad OS being weird. It took me several minutes to figure out where is this pen everyone's talking about, and then I remembered. Oh, the modal's interactive, and you swipe to open up more tools. And I finally found where all the other tools were. But, geez, just give me something, Apple. Come on, like I had no idea. Like nothing indicated I could swipe through that modal. But anyway, if you go to Procreate, the shadows don't do anything yet because that Procreate's going to have to adapt. They're going to have to get their artists over there to generate 3D images of shadows so that they can do the thing too, if they even choose to. I think Procreate will, because that's just, that company is very excited about this kind of stuff. But you pick a tool and a brush and a size, and the hover feature is great, but then you barrel roll and you can make the paintbrush huge so you can see it and rotate it, and it does the job. Like that's just part of Pencil Kit. They don't have to support that directly, so anything you're already using that supports Pencil Kit will support these new features. The fancy shadows and stuff like that and specific haptic types, not going to happen until they bake it into the app.
How good is the Find My Apple Pencil experience?
It's non-existent.
Okay.
Yeah, so people who are wondering what this was going to be, if I had to equate it to anything, it's basically the Apple TV remote. It's a Bluetooth signal. It can just be like, hey, the last time you had it connected to the iPad was in this general geographic location. Once you get within range, it's like you're probably 30 feet away. It can get you within, I think, about 5 to 6 feet. But, I mean, it'll get you to the desk you were sitting at when you lost it. So go pick up the thing that it's underneath and find it. But it's not obviously a U1 chip. It's not making any noises. It can't vibrate, which I think would be the way to go. If I was Apple,
have the haptics go nuts.
Yeah, have it just vibrate like a cell phone ringing or something, so it makes some kind of noise. But
that's disappointing. I wish it was like an AirTag.
I think this is new. This is something this is another software side thing. There's nothing that says it needs a special doodad inside the pencil to make it do Left Behind notifications. You can't currently do Left Behind notifications, which is honestly the only thing I would want for Apple Pencil. I don't need it to precision find. It's a big white pencil. I mean, unless it literally slip between cushions, it should be pretty obvious as long as you can get to where it was. But notify me if I've left it behind.
I lost one pencil in a van, and I ordered another one, and I found it a week later because it was like in some crevice in this van. I looked in that car for many hours, and
I don't think this would help you. It would get you
to the van.
It might even get you to the seat that it's stuck in. So it's probably better than nothing, but it's still not as precise as you would want it to be. But Left Behind, man, Apple, I know this, it just came out, so I'll give them a break. The software and hardware teams don't always get to communicate. I mean, the Find My team's its own separate entity, so they might have said, hey, this thing's going to happen, and this is all they had time to develop. Who knows? But get it. We'll see. Maybe they'll bake something more in. Maybe this is all they'll ever do. But yeah, it is not. it's not that big a deal. I wouldn't go and buy an Apple Pencil Pro and a new iPad just because of Find My.
Right. So before the event, I was speculating that we might be able to capture and edit spatial videos with the new Final Cut for iPad and the new camera system. But instead, they got rid of that camera that could have enabled it. Did you ever take advantage of that ultra-wide on the iPad Pro?
I'm pretty sure Apple found that 0 photos in the history of the iPad were taken with the ultra-wide.
I would assume that number, I believe. I'm also sad, like, spatial video on the iPad would have been perfect because you put it on a stand that doesn't move, which is great for spatial video. I'd love to just, like, set it down on the Magic Keyboard and capture a play session with my kid kind of thing.
The biggest issue is the ultra-wide camera was 10 megapixels. So they would have had to have upgraded that. And
no big deal.
It would have been
Pro.
Well, it would have made the camera bump larger. It would have been more expensive parts and an already expensive device. They would have probably had to raise the price of the iPad to account for it. The reason why they were able to achieve this thinness and that camera bump, if you haven't seen it, it is minuscule.
Okay.
So we would have lost those things. Right now, you can lay the iPad Pro on a desktop and it's basically flat. Yes, there is that little wedge in the corner,
but it's not
propping
bad.
it.
Okay.
But you would have lost all of that. So honestly, it's a good trade-off. Give me one camera that I barely use sometimes. Maybe for this new Final Cut feature, I don't know. But where you can do multicam, that's interesting to me. Even though I'm not a professional video editor, I want to go to a wedding and set up 4 family members' iPhones and control it from my iPad. Like, that's cool. I want to do that.
Is it weird to you that main sensor is identical to my second generation iPad Pro sensor? It seems to be the exact same everything except for the M4 chip enables ProRes capture.
This is Tim Cook's Apple. I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
It's cost saving. It's good enough. I think Apple got it right. If you're going to use the iPad camera for anything, it's probably document capture. I know people exist that go to concerts and hold up an iPad to record a video, especially the 13-inch one. They do exist. Don't. It's not for that. I mean, the only reason why it can take pictures is because it has to be a camera to be a document scanner. But really, it's not for that. That's not the use case.
Have you tried any scanning? Is the shadow issue actually gone for real, or is that just marketing?
I almost actually forgot that was a thing. There's so many good scanning feature. Like, I already can scan from the Files app, so I guess this being better at that is cool. And
my issue has always been I'm in the shadow of whatever scan I'm doing, and it'd be so nice to not have that. So I'm curious if that is actually happening.
What I want to see is something I do sometimes is I want to see how it does scanning photos. I'll find old photos from, I'm talking 1950, 1960 something, and I want to capture it in a way that's true to the photo. Doing that with an iPhone is possible, and I have done that for family members in the past, and it's nice, and it takes a lot of tinkering. I wonder if this feature could get around the reflections and shadows. That would be cool. That's something I need to try.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I'm curious to hear how that goes. The other camera thing is the front-facing camera is now in laptop mode, and I hear it's slightly off-center, which is making some people angry for some reason because it's kind of an invisible camera, but
it's 1,000 times better than it was before. So having my iPad in a stand on my desk, I would sit down, hit the space bar, unlock it, and get to work. The thing is, the attention feature for Face ID would require me to look in the direction of the Face ID sensor. And I'm at a distance, a nominal distance from the monitor and the iPad. And so looking between the left side of the iPad and the top of the iPad is far enough that the attention feature won't trigger if I'm looking at the top of the iPad, which is the wrong place in the old one. So I would have to remember to look physically to the left side of the iPad to unlock it, or to verify a purchase or to use Face ID on a website. I would have to look at it, and then I would stare at it for a second, realize nothing's happening, and then turn my eyes to the left to the correct Face ID position, and then actually do Face ID. On this one, it just happens. It's in the correct spot. My eyes go to it every time. It just makes sense. It's where it's so much better.
Yeah. And then I saw this mentioned on Threads. I'm curious if you experienced the same. Quote unquote, test driving the iPad Pro 11 M4 And something that's not being mentioned is the Face ID accuracy improvements. With my 12.9 M1, I would need to be about 12 inches from the screen to register. With the M4, I can be about 18 inches away. Are you seeing the same thing? Can you be farther away from the iPad and it's still registering?
I'm not pulling out a ruler.
Yeah, just like, I don't know.
It feels like it's the same as far as distance. I'm sitting a few feet away from my monitor and iPad. Honestly, it was good enough before, so I don't know that
would be a fun test as an Apple Insider article. Like, have your old iPad Pro set up right next and see, which one registers first.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, that's the attention problem. Is whichever one I'm looking at is the one that's going to unlock.
Is there a mode that you can have attention disabled and just like it registers the face? Okay, yeah, that's what you need to do. Have it.
You can turn off attention awareness.
Yeah, I would turn that off and like see which one works better, because that's the thing that people are curious. Like, why doesn't the iMac have Face ID? It's like you need to be kind of close or had to be in the past. So maybe they finally cracked that.
Well, Face ID is expensive. And it requires space. And in MacBooks, it doesn't have that space.
Yeah.
In iMacs, it maybe has that space, but you're right on the edge of, I know iMacs are thicker than iPhones, sure. But it's just that's the problem you're dealing with. But then you're only putting Face ID in the iMacs? What? Or like, I don't know, Studio Display? We'll see.
Yeah, that'd be weird. I wonder if the iMac will learn from the iPad Pro in thinness.
Well, yeah, that could be cool. I mean, if it stays a base level M series processor, I think we've proven these very thin products can work pretty well with the M series chips. So I don't know. The iMac is such an odd product because it's kind of a dinosaur. Apple knows it's kind of it's just not the one people buy. If you're either buying a MacBook Air or a Mac Studio,
the iMac is for you're checking in at a barbershop.
Yeah, casual Mac desktop user is a shrinking niche by the minute.
No, I mean, I think the market's pretty large for like work, for like computers at stores and all that.
The enterprise.
Yeah, enterprise, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, just if you, I don't know, buy an iPad. That's
yeah.
I real quick before we get to, I think Nano-Texture is next.
Yeah.
This makes me worried, I will say, about the Studio Display. What is Apple, because I'm sitting here working from Studio Display and it's fine. It's not like it's broken because the new iPad came out, but it is such a notable different technology now. We have LED backlighting on one, OLED on the other. The color ranges are different, and glossy versus Nano-Texture. I guess I can go buy a Nano-Texture Studio Display. Whatever. It's different Nano-Texture.
It is. But, I would probably say better. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, we're going to get to that next sentence, but I don't know. I want to see what Apple does with Studio Display. They've never people theorized when the Studio Display first came out, why does it have a Apple chip in it? They theorized that it could be for better iPad interactions or something like that. Apple's never done anything with that. Maybe we just hyped it and it's just
let it run
display
tvOS,
driver,
please.
Yeah, like just do something with that. I don't know. Studio Display feels like an interesting place because I have the Vision Pro now, but I also work a lot from iPad, so I guess I'm in the market for a better display. But man,
and Sony
and
sells,
OLED.
I have the M-Zone M9, I think it is, and that's a mini LED, kind of similar to the old school iPad Pro screen technology, and it looks great. So that's the kind of the $900 range, I think.
Well, the problem is the iPad Pro right now has the best consumer display in a product, period.
Yes.
You can't, and maybe we'll get to the chipset later if we have time for that, but it also has the fastest consumer single core chipset available in a computer. In the iPad, it has the best display and the best chipset in a computer. And that's wild. And
what display do you pair with that? Because that gets expensive if you make a big one of those.
Yeah, and if Apple's like, okay, well, let's just do the Tandem OLED Nano-Texture etch display for $30,000, right? I don't know what they're going to do there, but that definitely scares me in my wallet a little bit. But I'm interested to see what Studio Display evolves into, if it evolves at all.
Yeah, so let's get to the display. So first up, I just want to talk about Nano-Texture. You went with Nano-Texture. You bought this sight unseen as far as going that route?
Yeah, so I ordered this online. There's no Apple Store within a reasonable distance. I think 2 hours is my closest one. I'm not going to have a chance to see it beforehand. I just went for it, but on the promise of it being better for sunlight use.
Yeah, and when they first announced this, I was baffled. On the last episode, if you're listening to this last episode with Matt Birchler, I was a bit baffled. They call this Nano-Texture, and what we since learned since that episode is it's not physically nano-textured like the old ones. It's chemically nano-textured. That's a big difference because one, you can touch and not get finger cuts and destroy the display, and the other one, as you said earlier, feels exactly like your old iPad. The big reason I could think that you would opt for this model is as a product reviewer, you can actually take photos of your iPad now without being in the shot.
There's so many directions this can go. There's a lot of discourse around this Nano-Texture. So first thing I want to get by is every video you see of someone standing in an Apple store with an iPhone recording a video saying, look how bad this looks.
Yeah.
These black levels are terrible. They're all just ignore all of them collectively because I get it. They're not incorrect. If you go to an Apple store and stand in front of two iPads side by side, one glossy, one Nano-Texture, and take a video, the Nano-Texture is going to probably make any black image look like faded out garbage. So I'm not calling them inaccurate, but the use case isn't there. So I'll get back to that point in just a second. But the Nano-Texture differences here, it's very important. So the way Nano-Texture works on the other monitors Apple sells, and so they should have come up with a different name.
They really should have, because I was very confused at the announcement, at least.
Yeah, so the Nano-Texture on the Pro Display XDR and the Studio Display, you can almost call it macro texture instead of Nano-Texture because it's actually physically large etched glass that is actually a display cover over the regular glass that captures light by reflecting it away from the user. So any light or any reflections that make it to the display are basically diffused into the maze of etched glass, right? So instead of it, if it's a flat surface like a pond, it'll bounce right back into your face. Like you look into a still pond, you'll see your face in the reflection. You'll see the sun behind you in the water. Throw a rock in that water, and suddenly all you see is the water because the light is being diffused through all of the ripples in the surface. Think of it that way. You're just creating these kind of ripples across the glass to capture the light in a way so that the light is still there. Like you shine the sun on waves, the sun's going to be making the water turn a yellowish hue, but you can't see a literal image of the sun in the water anymore. Nano-Texture is much larger on those displays, and on purpose. You have to use a special cloth. You can't touch it. It's very specifically built. Now, I think what the iPad has is a true interpretation of the term Nano-Texture, because what they're doing is they're doing the same thing, but first of all, it's with the iPad display. It's not a film. It's not a cover. It's not a screen protector. It's not Paperlike. I've seen so many people make comparisons. It is the iPad glass.
Yeah.
And the glass cover, all the way to the bezel doesn't have it, is chemically treated so that the same etching occurs, but on a even more microscopic level, to the point that the grooves are so close together that you rub your finger over the surface of it, you won't feel them because there's not enough of an indentation and not enough of a groove to actually feel it with your fingers. Your fingers aren't that sensitive to the surface. If you had a more sensitive instrument, you could actually rub it across it and it would be able to tell you that there's grooves in the display.
Yeah, you should get like a microscope and do some microscopic photo captures of that.
That could be fun. I do not own a microscope, but no.
Do you
so like,
think that Apple will eventually bring this type of Nano-Texture to the Mac, or do you think the physical etching that they did for the Mac is a better solution if you're not touching the screen?
I think what they've done for the iPad, and I may be wrong, again, anyone who might know better, come tell me. But my understanding is I think what Apple has done on the iPad is a superior form of it because, again, it's not an extra layer of glass. You're not the problem with adding more layers is it increases thickness and it changes how light diffuses through the surface. So you do get that duller, less sharp image through traditional texturing.
Okay. Yeah, 'cause I thought the previous Nano-Texture was like just as bright and vibrant and all that.
The previous Nano-Texture allows the image to be sharp and retain most of its color density and everything like that, but it's still a visible texture on the glass. Like, it still reduces sharpness.
Okay.
And the iPad, technically speaking, if you want to get really technical, does make the text ever so slightly, like if a micron fuzzier. I don't even know that I can tell, but I'm not going to sit here and say having this texture on the glass doesn't change anything about the picture, because that would just be wrong. Because that's just not how light works.
Yeah.
The light getting in has to pass through the maze, but the light coming out also has to pass through this Nano-Texture maze. So it's going to change how things are seen. But because it's so small, it's going to have a minimal effect. And so much so that I've done a lot of testing on this particular aspect. I don't have another OLED display here to compare to. So honestly, if I did, I would probably see a greater difference. But I do have my mini LED display. And side by side and normal lighting, the mini LED display, as long as a light source isn't hitting it directly, looks fine next to the OLED display. I started Blade Runner, and the opening scene with the text appearing on the black surface was a blinding mess on the mini LED, whereas it was perfectly crisp on the iPad Pro with OLED. So that
with a single light source in the room.
Yeah, and the display works the same, I think, on a ramp.
Yeah.
So if you have them both in a similar environment, pitch black room, identical.
Right.
OLED next to OLED Nano-Texture in a black room, like a movie theater environment, you're not going to see any difference in black levels. And this is where people seem to be getting confused. Again, I will go ahead and take the idea that maybe the OLED with Nano-Texture might have a micron more gray in it. So I'm not going to say it's a perfect black, because that's probably technically wrong, but it's so close I can't differentiate myself.
How's the off-axis viewing with it? Like, if you're in like a well-lit environment and you're trying to have two people watch the screen at the same time.
Well, so I'm getting to that. So it's a long journey. Just stick with me. So you go from the pitch black room to the medium level room. So basically, my office of lights are on. It's not dark. It's bright enough for Vision Pro to work. So get that in that kind of brightness level, but it's not bright as an Apple store. The displays next to each other will pretty much be identical still, as long as there's no light sources shining directly on the device. Go to the brightest setting outdoors. That's when you're going to start noticing a difference in black levels, as long as there's no direct light source. The Nano-Texture is going to start taking on what I would call a fog, almost, because it's reflecting so much light inwardly that it's going to brighten up the display a little bit and bring out some of those blacks to be a little bit more gray. But that's the whole point, because in every one of these settings, except for the pitch black room, I can see myself in the glossy display. I can see reflections of my hands, of my face, of any other light, of any object passing in front of it, lights in the room, a reflection of a light off of a mirror in the background that just happened to be caught in the... All of that is so totally visible. It is... I can't believe I never noticed it before, but when it's side by side, it's uncanny, because it looks broken on the Nano-Texture display, because there's none of that ever. You never, ever, ever see a reflection of anything, because it cannot... It does not have the capability of showing a reflection. So getting to your question, I've been carrying it around. I took it to a family gathering. We were outside on a porch, so we weren't in direct sunlight, but it was very bright outside, so the porch was getting plenty of light in. If you look at your phone, you would have basically seen a perfect reflection of your face. It's where Netflix's Black Mirror comes from.
Yeah.
But yeah, you look at your phone, you're still getting a reflection of your face, but it's bright enough that it's going to break through that reflection and the UI is visible. But, if any part of the screen goes to black, you're immediately going to see whatever's being reflected at that moment. The Nano-Texture display was just not that. I've shown people OLED, HDR, 4K, all of these revolutions in screen technology, and they're like, I'll take it or leave it. I don't notice any difference. Nano-Texture is the first time I've ever shown anyone a display and then be like, how is it doing this? It's unreal to them that they can look at a display and not see any reflections whatsoever. And getting past the reflections point, if a direct source of light, a flashlight, an overhead light, whatever, hits this display, it'll hit it, and it causes this washed out white-ish noise to appear over the content, but the content is still plainly visible. It's just but if it's a black image on the screen, it'll become more grayish, but it's also very legible and visible. You take that same light source, bouncing it off the glossy display, the display becomes unreadable, inaccessible. That's the difference. So all of that said, I wish I had a way to say it faster or better, but I feel like it's important to understand. In general use cases, OLED with Nano-Texture is going to be indistinguishable from glossy 90% of the time, and the 10% of the time where it really counts, it's going to do the work to actually make it worth it, to be very different from a glossy display in the best ways.
Do you see this as like I'm sitting by the pool reading an ebook kind of device now?
That scares me a little bit because children often are by the pool and decide to splash people. But
yeah,
but yeah, no, this is definitely. I haven't tried reading outside with it yet, but that's the idea. I think
if you're using a black background too, those pixels wouldn't light up, so that would generate even less heat. Am I right?
Right. So you wouldn't necessarily be lighting up any of that display as long as it's a true black and not a gray.
Yeah.
So maybe it could be pretty battery efficient to read a white text black background book out in sunlight, and that's something I need to test too. But yeah, I just want to reiterate. So I had a discussion with someone recently on Mastodon asking about this. Don't go and buy a 1 terabyte iPad just to get Nano-Texture.
Right.
Okay. That's not what I'm saying. But if you happen to be, if you're already there and you know that you spend any amount of time using the iPad anywhere other than a dim room, it's worth at least considering. Just don't dismiss it out of hand, because that seems to be what everyone's doing, is just like, it makes my display worse. And I don't buy that. It may not be your preference. My boss, Mike, it's just straight up not his preference. He said he's seen it. He's looked at it. He doesn't like what it does to black levels. It's not his preference. That's fine. But for me,
and he saw it at a home setting or the Apple Store.
I believe he saw it in, he has access to pre-release units through something he does with military contracting or whatever. But yeah, like different settings. He actually wrote about this in the iPad Air write up if you want to go, because he discusses how he goes and does the hands-on or whatever. But
yeah, okay.
Yeah, he's seen them though, and he's just like, I'm okay, and that's fine. You can have that preference. But for me, I don't know. Maybe my eye acuity just isn't there, but I'm not seeing this black level change. But also, I'll be fair and say I also don't notice refresh rate that much. People are like, oh, you're playing a video game, and they're like, your frames are dropping, and I'm like, I understand technically what you're saying, but I don't see it happening.
Yeah.
On the screen. Like, I can tell the difference between 40 hertz and 60, but these people will claim they can tell the difference between 55 and 65.
Yeah, I don't know
right?
about those people. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't. I don't understand. So I think it's the same kind of person who would say, yeah, your OLED blacks aren't as black as they could be. I'm like, yeah, but is that micron really that noticeable? And here's the last point, because I know I've talked long about this. Hopefully I haven't made all your listeners run away. My last point on this is, everything you've seen about this Nano-Texture display is by comparing it directly to a device right next to it. Let me tell you, get rid of the other device next to it and you won't even know it's there.
Yeah.
It's just, you're using an iPad now, and it just happens to be an iPad. Yeah, and you just happen to be using an iPad that's really great at not being destroyed by sunlight. That's it. That's the mentality you need to have about this.
Have you used Paperlike? I know you've mentioned I hate putting screen protectors on my screen as well. You don't like it as either. But as far as the matte effect, is it a big difference from what you've seen?
I've tried multiple screen things for my iPads before, so it's not. I don't like them, but I still gave them the college try because I've heard people say, "Oh, it's cool. It gives you a texture feel and all of that." By the way, do not put anything on your Nano-Texture display. Don't.
Yeah, you'll rub it. Yeah, you'll take off the Nano-Texture, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't know in this case what it'll do because it's chemically treated, but I still think it would be very bad. You'd probably
I wonder, like long term, would this wash off? I guess if you did enough bad cleaning of it and all that.
Well, my understanding of it is a literal etching of the glass, so you're not going to like wash it off. Like maybe erosion is a better word. Like, are you going to erode the texture away?
Okay.
That's I think the reason why Apple gives you the scare.
It's not like the oleophobic coating that would wash off within the year.
Yeah, like only use this cloth because if you accidentally use a cloth that's one bit more rough than this cloth, then you're in danger of eroding away the Nano-Texture. That's
gotcha.
I think erosion might be an issue, but like quote unquote washing it off, like unless you're using a chemical treatment, I don't know, but I wouldn't directly apply adhesive to it because then that's a whole different issue because then whatever that sticky stuff that holds the screen protector on is going to get into the grooves and I don't know, it would ruin it. It would just bad day for everyone. But I have used these kinds of protectors in the past and it's just always a no. Within a few days, I look at it and I'm like, it's ugly. I'm really good at putting these things on, so it's not like an air bubble issue or hair got trapped under there or something. It's just it's physically visible in a way that Nano-Texture is not, that you always see it there. It creates this, there's a word for it that escapes Moya. Anyway, there's a word for this kind of visual effect. And it's the hazy effect is just the best way to describe it. It's that you're looking at it and it looks kind of wet, I guess, like that sheen is over the display never goes away when you're using one of these like paper-like things. I can't get past that. I rip it off. The minute I notice it, I'm just like, I can't do this anymore, and I pull it off. Okay. Nano-Texture is not like that.
Okay. And this display, I've been hearing on all sorts of podcasts, it's the same brightness as the old mini LED display. It's like, kinda, but not at all really, because this display gets to 1,000 nits SDR brightness, which is the most common use of your display, versus 600, which that seems like almost double, seems like a dramatic improvement in brightness. Have you tried using it outside where I could almost never use my iPad before?
Yeah, this is what I was getting at before. There's the combining it with the Nano-Texture. So sorry, I don't have the ability to speak to what does the 1,000 nits SDR glossy look like. I can't tell you. Yeah, but with the Nano-Texture, it's just you're using a display outside. It's bright, it's color rich. The blacks are still coming through great. Everything. It's just, and the SDR is everywhere. And I don't know. I can't remember how much of iPadOS is HDR, but I'm
very little
certain.
I mean, you look at the Photos app and the photos pop out as HDR, but you're pretty much looking at SDR all day long.
Yeah, like the UI, the home view, the home screen, the like the apps settings, like all windowing UI, all of that stuff is SDR content, but now it's double the brightness. So turn your iPad as bright as it can go and step into direct sunlight with Nano-Texture, and you're just looking at a bright rectangle and not direct
amazing.
Sunlight.
And it can hold that brightness pretty well with the heatsink and all that. Does pretty well.
Yeah. So this is what's weird. So there's a 1600 peak, right? HDR
for HDR, yeah.
And I think people always get this confused. Why is there so many ratings? Well, 1600 nit peak brightness means that if you're watching a HDR, Dolby Vision, whatever movie, and there's a scene where a guy is standing and he's eclipsed in shadow and the sun is directly behind him. Well, that little spot, that's the sun or a flashlight or like a street lamp.
Blast from his mouth.
Yeah, like that particular area of the screen will temporarily get to 1600 nits of brightness if you have your brightness turned all the way up. Because the panel can run that for a few seconds, but not very long. And if it's there too long, you might notice it start to dim, but usually those effects are very, very brief. So that's 1600 nit peak brightness. An area of, like, the whole display can't be 1600 nits ever. That just can't do that.
But 1,000, it's good at sustaining that even outside. You're saying,
yeah, corner to corner. So 1,000 nits is the. It's not a peak brightness, because a peak brightness assumes that it's only going to be there temporarily. 1,000 nits sustained brightness, meaning it can corner to corner be 1,000 nits. And now, yeah, sure, if it started to overheat, it would probably duck that a little bit. But I mean, I haven't encountered that yet. But I haven't had much time to go. I haven't been outside for multiple hours in the sun using a display either. So,
okay, yeah, that's very exciting, because like before, I'd bring my iPad to work and try to use it outside occasionally on my breaks, and it's just not usable, and it would just be so disappointing. It's like even trying to find a shady spot, it was just like not
everything. Everything appears dark, right? Like, yeah, like if you ever look at a 600 nit display in bright sunlight, you feel like something's broken. Like everyone's had to have experienced this at least once, even with their phones, of the UI appearing like it's got a window shade pulled over it, and all you can see is reflections of light, your face, and if you squint, you might be able to see the UI behind it, and then you'll see that thing people do where they're squinting and they hold the phone up vertically so it's not reflecting background, and then they're holding their hand over it to try and block some of the light, and then you can see it. You don't have to do any of that with Nano-Texture, so that's great. But the 1,000 nits, I think, just doubles down on that and makes it even more usable outdoors.
Yeah, we're still one step away from our 2,000 peak brightness outdoors that the iPhone's got, and that is just a godsend. Using the iPhone outside really is impressive. But with the Nano-Texture, that might be a big solve for a lot of that too.
I wonder if Nano-Texture on a phone is next for us.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if they feel they need it or not with the 2,000 nits, if that kind of compensates for any of that.
My concern, iPad doesn't go in your pocket, but iPhone does. I don't know that I would want Nano-Texture on something that's going to rub the inside of my pocket or get sweat on it, you know?
Yeah.
That's the difference.
And then, Nano-Texture seems to be either in limited supply or very popular, because it's mid-July at this point if you want any model with Nano-Texture.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a popular option. It's definitely probably it only adds $100.
Yeah.
And so if people want my recommendation, this is it. If you're already there, if you're already buying a 1 terabyte iPad Pro because you heard you get more GPU cores and 16 gigs of RAM, and you're just like, I'm here. Don't do it otherwise. Yeah. Don't go in the store and be like, well, I really want the 256 gig. Get that model. Don't jump up just to get Nano-Texture. Yeah. So if you're already there, go ahead and if you have the ability to do returns reasonably, go ahead and get the Nano-Texture. Take it home, use it for a couple days, see how you feel. Put some OLED super black content on there. Go outside, stand in the middle of the sun. Try it out. See if you like it, and if you do, keep it. If you don't, return it within that 2-week return period. No one's going to care. And some people get scared about that. They don't even ask. They're just like, okay. And then they'll refund you the $100 and give you a different model. Whatever you do, don't base your decision off of what other people say in a TikTok video of them standing in an Apple store.
Yeah.
Because it's just not a good representation of the technology. And so to bring this full circle, the reason why those videos look so bad, there's multiple reasons. One, Apple stores are uncannily bright. They're so bright. They have lights everywhere.
Yes, they do.
And the floors are white, the ceilings are white, the tables are a bamboo light color, so light is just bouncing everywhere. So the OLED with Nano-Texture is going to be getting light from every direction. So no matter what angle you view this display as, you're probably going to be catching some kind of light. So it's going to cause that fuzzy grayish effect that happens with Nano-Texture when it's absorbing the light. And you put that next to an OLED display, which you can get to a proper angle where the reflections aren't so bad, and say, look how black the blacks are. Of course, that's how it's going to work. You kind of manipulated the plan here. But, and again, you're never going to compare them side by side when you're sitting in your living room. So I would just take it home and give it a shot. I think it's just, this is one of the very few pieces of technology that Apple's ever released that actually looks worse in the store than it does in your living room.
Yeah. So, mini LED display on the old iPad Pro 12.9 looks very impressive, and still I think looks great today, and I still love that display. How subtle or not so subtle are the improvements here to the Tandem OLED?
So, obviously, like I said, black levels infinite. Yeah,
right.
Bloom is gone. It's just gone.
You don't have the thing where you're in a black drafts window and your cursor has a little light show behind it.
I forgot how drastic bloom was, because I just use the iPad. I'm not one of these tech nerds that's like constantly analyzing. Like, I'm just using the device.
Yeah, most of I don't encounter or care if it's there. Like,
yeah, like I'm just kind of moving past it. It's a part of it. It's not something I'm like, oh, I need to write something about. No, whatever. I'm just using the device. So yeah, bloom existed. It just fell into the background. It's kind of like jelly scrolling in the iPad Mini. It's there. People get annoyed by it. I don't understand it. I just use the thing the way it's supposed to be used. But then when I'm doing these comparisons, when I'm getting in my analyzation brain going, right, I'm truly looking for the differences. Wow, are they stark, right? Like I said, the just the example of Blade Runner, and then if anyone's never seen the new Blade Runner, the more recent one, Ryan Gosling, I believe.
Yeah.
The opening, they all do this, but the opening has a text crawl-ish. It's just small text, black background, explaining a few things about replicants or whatever. It's just text. It's like reading an ebook on the OLED iPad Pro, whereas the mini LED backlight, you've got these large glowing rings around every letter. And there's 25,000 lighting zones, but it turns out it's those 25,000 lighting zones aren't small enough to light only a letter of a character. So on a screen, like a size 12 font. So that alone was such a perfect example, but anything with stars, one of the photos that I took to compare the OLED, if you go look at the hands-on, I have some Nano-Texture comparisons to try and exemplify exactly what that haze looks like, and I go into details. The scene that I chose was the Holdo maneuver from Star Wars Episode 8, that the very controversial thing that, people say is broken. It's one of my favorite things they ever. It's one of my favorite things they ever did. Like, it's so perfect. But it's basically, for anyone who's never seen the movie, they take a starship and ram it into another starship at light speed, and it causes this giant, this crazy light show with no audio. It's just beautiful. Anyway, I use that for my comparison because it's a black space background. But funny enough, I did notice the blacks in a lot of movies aren't true black. Even in space, sometimes they've got a gray. So in that scene in Star Wars, they're kind of gray. Even though I can hear you now. No, it's not because of the Nano-Texture. I've looked at true blacks. Like I went and found actual true blacks, and they are true black on this OLED panel. Even
you looked on your Vision Pro with its micro OLED with no Nano-Texture.
Yeah. Like, it's just funny to me that sometimes space isn't true black. In Star Wars, it wasn't in that instance. But the reason why you can tell is, the bars, right? So it's like a stupid aspect ratio. I think Star Wars is shot even wider than 16:9. You get the large black bars on the top and bottom. Those are off pixels, like, right? So those are still perfectly black. Even with images running across the side, the giant light streaks of the explosion running to the edge of the image into the black bars surrounding the movie, there's no blooming. Now, on the mini LED iPad, you're going to get blooming around the fringes of any video you're watching because it's going to leak the backlight into those areas. So just another thing, it's just more immersive. It's just so nice having no more bloom. That's really the biggest thing you're going to get from OLED. OLED's also technically better at color saturation. You're going to get richer colors, but it's not going to be noticeable enough because you're still in the P3 color gamut, so it's still very nice colors. But yeah, like everything there, as far as that goes, is fine. It's just the biggest differences you're going to see is in those black levels and how lighting is handled.
And have you been hit by any of the weird display issues that have been making their way around social media channels? I've been hearing of some just some weird color issues, maybe some green or grays.
There's two different things happening. One, there's an HDR issue that iMore discovered, where certain shades of blue or like really harsh like indigos come through broken with like white streaks in them. So that's just an HDR bug they're gonna have to patch, which might have already been patched. I think there's been an update since then, 2 updates actually. Also, I at first noticed, and this is the side-by-side thing, next to my mini LED iPad Pro, I noticed a green tinting. Now, I don't know if that was my eyes. That could have been the way my office was lit. That could have been an effect of the Nano-Texture. It could have been an effect of the HDR. I don't know. But at first, I noticed this odd green. So you've heard this from other people that there's like a green tint to some things.
Yeah.
I don't know what to categorize it as. And again, this was only when I was holding it side by side to another iPad. It could simply be because, and people listening, if you didn't know, every panel does things differently. Samsung and Sony, go to Best Buy is not a very good example, but if you were able to see them side by side in a regular environment, Samsungs are going to favor blues and greens, and Sony's are going to favor reds. I've always noticed that. And I prefer Sony because I prefer how they handle the red colors. And they do really well in blues too, but Samsungs generally do them better. That's why Samsungs look so much clearer. They kind of get that soap opera effect sometimes. But all panels are different. So these OLED panels are different. They are tandem OLED. So that's even more different from what we're used to. So it could be a calibration thing that Apple needs to adjust in their side of things. You can't do anything on your end on the iPad, sadly. It's not like the Mac where you can turn on different color profiles. I expect this will be fixed or changed in some way. I haven't noticed it since. So that initial day with it, I noticed it because my eyes were adjusting to it or whatever. But since then, next to the studio display, it's not like my iPad Pro is green and my studio display isn't, right? They're the same display now. It's, as far as color goes, not black levels. But yeah, I don't know what that was. It could have gone away with an update. I haven't been paying enough attention to look for it again. Maybe that's my fault. But I did notice that initially, but it's since gone away.
Okay. And do you think we'll get tandem OLED on the iPhone? It already gets to 2000 nits brightness on the iPhone. I don't know how they're doing that on OLED. Maybe a smaller screen is easier to do that with OLED?
Yes. Well, so yeah, I think the problem is because the iPad is so large, and the pixels in that case, it's that 264 pixel density for Retina. I'm not sure. I think it has to do with the panel size because you run into having to get enough power to every LED, and so because it has to be like a wattage issue or how large the connectors are between the power source and the display tech.
Yeah.
So you're trying to get full power to an OLED pixel in the middle of the display and get it up to 2000 nits might be harder to do and require more energy on a larger display. So it's less tenable. So you just do 2 panels stacked on top of each other and do half that brightness to get the full brightness that you're looking for, and bam, now you've reached 1000 nits. Whereas on iPhone, you're doing it across a much smaller surface area, so you're required to fire less pixels across a lesser area with less wattage. And I think that might be the difference. But again, please, if I said anything weird there, feel free to reach out because I'm trying to understand this as much as you guys are.
Yeah, and that's why I'm not sure if we'll need tandem OLED for an iPhone because it already can do a lot of these things.
I think tandem OLED is a feature of larger displays. I'm with you. I don't think this is an iPhone thing. This doesn't need to come to iPhone.
And the other big benefit of tandem OLED, of course, is it's much lighter weight than mini LED, and that's a large part of how they can make it so thin. Which is funny that you can make it thinner with 2 displays in one, then like that just yeah.
It's because the backlight is so much.
Right. Yeah.
Right, because OLED is its own light source, whereas Mini LED is people get this confused a lot. Mini LED on the iPad Pro is the backlight. The pixels are still the standard LED configuration. The things making the color, the RGB elements are still the standard LEDs. It's just the backlight is Mini LED, which allows it to have more backlight zones. That's it. But because that was 2 separate pieces of technology, and the backlight itself is a thick, heavy piece of tech. That it's very densely packed with these with it. Much more stuff going on, making it thicker, heavier, all of that. OLED is this thin light material. It can produce its own light source, and stacking 2 of them on top of each other is so much more efficient for power, for everything else, than having a Mini LED backlight. So that's why you're able to get that thinness and that lightness.
Yeah. And then we've talked about the magnets changing on the new iPads, and that also enabled new configurations for this iPad Smart Folio. They've added more magnets or changed configuration so there's more options. Are you someone that's going to get a Smart Folio? Is that something that has a place in your life?
I don't have one now. Third parties make them with different origami things that they can do, and that's all interesting. I'm sure I'll end up with one eventually to review, probably, but it's not something I'll go out of my way to buy. If I'm not using it in laptop form, I'm holding it in my hands as a tablet.
Gotcha.
And I'm kind of tempted to pull a Federico and dissect a GameSir controller I have here and force it into an iPad Pro, but that requires me removing the springs. So if anyone knows what GameSir is, it's one of those. Have you seen one of these? It's one of those Backbone.
No.
You pull it apart and you put your phone in it. Well, GameSir makes them too, but I think it's more accessible than Backbone. Backbone's like this really tight unit. I wouldn't want to take one apart because it would just shatter. But GameSir is a little bit more, I don't know, large and has visible screws, and you can just get in there and do stuff. Well, turns out if you just remove the spring mechanisms and the stops, you can just pull them apart and then attach them to the sides of an iPad Pro. And Federico did that. I haven't read that full story yet, but that looks interesting, and I might try it because I have one of those GameSir controllers here that I'd be willing to sacrifice for science. So, because nobody makes an iPad controller anymore. There was that one company that did it first, Game Vice, I think.
Yeah.
They pretty much died and got resurrected by a partnership with Razer. So they still make these kinds of things, but they only do it for iPhone and the old iPad. And then most recently, Razer themselves came out with a controller, but it only goes as big as the iPad Mini. So we still don't have anyone making a dedicated large iPad controller.
Yeah, that'd be cool to see, especially since the newer iPad is so much lighter.
Yeah, I think it'd be a fun way to game. And I guess to bring this conversation full circle, that gets back to like the naked robotic core for iPad Pro. As much as people want to complain about iPad OS, and look, I'm an iPad first user, but that doesn't mean that I don't have wish list items. But I am still certainly not someone who wants Mac OS on an iPad. I just want iPad OS to be better. But I will say, for me, my iPad, it can be a tablet, a laptop, a desktop. It can be multiple different desktops with different configurations because of different magnetic stands and keyboard accessories I have around the house. It can be a handheld gaming computer with game controllers, or it can just be a television mounted on a vertical stand and with a external controller like a PlayStation DualSense, and have it sit on my coffee table and be a 13-inch gaming PC, right? Like, it's all of these things, and it's the only device that can do all of that together. And I think that's what makes iPad so magical.
Yeah. A couple just minor things I just wanted to make sure were all inclusive of the new iPad Pro. Did you ever utilize the old millimeter wave 5G in the M1 iPad Pro?
If I did, I didn't know about it. I had cellular, and I paid for a Verizon plan on it, and I would utilize that system every now and then. I honestly never noticed if it was 5G, 4G, or mmWave.
Okay. You are someone that actively uses that connection, though, it sounds like.
It's so nice. So I'm leaning into so previously what you'd have to do is go to Verizon and get a tablet plan and just permanently forever pay for a tablet, whether you're using it or not. Same thing with Apple Watch. I've changed a lot about how I'm handling my cellular. I've actually been changing a lot about how I handle my bills, and cellular was one of those that I was like, it's so expensive, it's so unnecessary. They want to give me Disney Plus and Apple TV and all these things I either already have or don't need, and there's just so much bloat. And then I discovered Visible. It's a Verizon company. There's a bunch of letters for it, something or other, analog basically, that uses the Verizon system. It uses their network, 4G and 5G, no 3G. So if I find myself in a 3G location, I will have to use SOS via satellite, I guess. But it's nationwide. I pay $400 for a whole year of service for my iPhone, 5G, unlimited calling, texting, internet. So awesome. Then I add on an Apple Watch, whatever. I have my cellular Apple Watch, so if I want it, I can go pop it in, remove it as needed. So it becomes so much more modular. So for my iPad right now, yeah, it's cellular, but there's no plan on it because I'm at home. I don't need a cellular plan. But if I travel, I can go buy a week of service from one of these eSIM companies, because now iPad is eSIM only, and I no longer need to pay every month for an iPad cellular plan I'm not using. But when I do need it, it's there to access, which is really so awesome for that. I'm glad the world shifted to that. I know everyone isn't there, and it can be kind of annoying in certain countries where they only have physical SIMs, and I would just be out of luck. But for me, I'm not in those places. I'm in the United States. I might travel to Europe where eSIM's regularly available. So great. All I have to do is pop into settings, pick a plan, and bam, I have a tablet plan for however long I need it. And that is so nice. So I'm excited for that.
Nice. Invisible supports the Apple Watch, but does it? And I'm not sure. Does it support the iPad if you wanted to from them?
Visible, I haven't tried yet. I think you can get a tablet plan, and it's very inexpensive, but I actually just haven't tried yet.
Okay.
And that's all done through the Visible app. So honestly, after this, I might go and install that and see how that works, if that'll let me do it. But even if Visible doesn't work with iPad, that's what's so cool about eSIM. Someone does, and I'll just go give them $1 and get my internet for a few days, because that's what's cool about a lot of these eSIM plans is you can pay for a week, and that's it, right? For some of these tablet plans.
Yeah, when we went to Italy, we had a local eSIM that we got just from a website, and it was great, super cheap, lots of data, and it was wonderful. This
would have been so cool in 2014 when I was on deployment, and because I was in France, I was in Bahrain and Dubai and Spain, and for only a few days at a time. Like, how amazing would it have been? But instead, I had to get off the ship, find a local seller, and buy a physical SIM. Open my phone up, put it inside, and it was just this whole process. Now it's just click buy and you're done. And that's really cool to me.
Yeah. And then we lost a microphone as well as a camera, so we're now at 4 instead of 5 microphones. I doubt you've noticed any changes with your audio recording tests you've done,
No, I mean, it goes back to what are you using the iPad for? If you're doing a FaceTime call, the call audio through that is hit its peak. You're not going to get better or worse using the onboard microphones. It's just as good as it's going to be. I'm not going to record a video with an iPad unless it's just like I'm happen to be holding it and something's happening in front of me, I guess.
Right, yeah.
But it's just, if I'm on a call, I'll probably put in an AirPod anyway.
Yeah.
I'm at the point now where it's so weird. I almost don't need speakers and microphones in half of my equipment, because I'll just put in an AirPod and that's my speakers and microphones. But I'm glad that they're there. It's useful, but it's just not,
Does the thinner design impact the speakers at all? Like, is it the same quality to your ears?
I haven't noticed any difference, but I'm also not looking for that in particular. It's something I'd have to try. But I mean, it's not. I'm one of these nerds who will yell at people who own a flat screen TV and no soundbar, because speakers out of a flat screen TV are just disgusting and should be illegal. Just
I think
they're just so bad.
Speakers are a lot better than most TV speakers.
They're so good for two reasons. One, they're pointed at you. And TV speakers, if you guys didn't know, point to the wall because it's trying to create a reverb effect.
Yeah.
if your TV isn't near a wall, they do nothing, and they just anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, the iPad speakers, the grills are pointed away, but generally speaking, they reflect up to your ears. The spatial audio coming through them actually works pretty well. They're really well done, and there's 4 of them in the iPad Pro, and I've noticed that they're pretty nice.
Nice. And then the M4 chip, just very briefly. The one app I'd love for you to try as you're doing more testing is Transcriptionist. That's from an app from the developer of the Wooji Juice Ferrite developer there, and it will do AI powered local transcriptions. So I think if any app will push the iPad to its limits, that's the one to test out, I think.
Well, I think as we close, this is a perfect opportunity to talk about the future of the iPad. Transcriptionist sounds interesting, but what if I were to tell you that Apple's ready to Sherlock that feature? So
I
Apple
can see that
Insider,
happening, yes.
yeah. So Apple Insider, we've been covering a lot of firsthand information. We've been getting information from sources familiar with the upcoming releases, so you can go and check those out. There's a calculator coming to iPad, transcriptions and notes with voice memos. So you'll be able to open the Notes app, click record voices, and the UI looks identical to voice memos, and it will provide a transcription with summaries inside of the Notes app. So like a lot of that stuff's coming. That's all really exciting. That's all Apple's AI push. But the reason why I wanted to bring this up in WWDC is the idea that I think Greg Joswiak and John Turnus, they've been on a little tour.
Yeah.
They've brought up this concept, and I want to know if you've heard them mention this, heard them mentioning this, but that the iPad Pro is Apple's first AI first computer.
Didn't they say that about the MacBook Air M3?
Well, so that they promoted the MacBook Air M3 as a powerful AI computer.
Yeah.
Because of the neural engine and everything. But I think the distinction here is they're calling the iPad Pro if you have an AI workflow, you don't go buy a Mac. You go buy the M4 iPad Pro. Like that's kind of how they've been. Maybe I misinterpreted that, and I don't have the quote or link directly in front of me, but that's something that I caught off the back end of something. So maybe I'm making it up. I don't know. I'm pretty sure that that's something that they said, and it's basically the idea that we don't know when they keep. Who knows? Yeah, it's obviously WWDC, but we're going to see Apple's AI strategy. But one of the things with the M4 and that new neural engine, and things that benchmarks can't capture now, is how powerful a device this is going to be. That modular computing platform, you remember all those things I listed before, will add AI powerhouse to that list. If I need to do something with artificial intelligence, dumb name, but that's what people call it.
Yep.
If I want to do something with that kind of computing, I'm not going to pick up my MacBook Pro. iPad Pro will be the AI computing machine that Apple's pushing forward. And I think if that is what they're going for to justify putting M4 in, to justify calling it a pro computer, I think that'll be a very interesting story for iPad OS 18 and what we're going to see next.
Yeah, for sure. And then I guess one of the final M4 things, do you think Apple will tune the M4 chip differently in Mac laptops? Because they mentioned that the iPad Pro can maintain the 10-hour battery life with a smaller battery in the 12.9 because the M4 is more power efficient. Do you think the M4 laptops will just get a better battery life out of this thing?
I think so. They're not about to tweak the case design of these laptops anytime soon. They just did that for the whole lineup. Yeah. So no reason to change that. They'll just get more battery life, and I know that's frustrating for some people. But
it'll be interesting, though. See how much battery life you can get out of it for a MacBook Air or something like that.
I mean, I know that the MacBook Air can last all day now.
Yeah.
I mean, realistically, as long as you're not doing like Final Cut production, you can get a MacBook Air to last 10, 15 hours without blinking. And the iPad is a 10-hour battery life if you're browsing Safari or whatever.
Yeah, the 10-hour thing.
It's more like 6 hours.
Yeah, it hasn't felt like 10 hours in years for me.
Yeah, it's more like 6 if you're away from an outlet. But for me, I don't know. I'm such a weird use case. I don't encounter these limitations usually because
if you're at a desk, you're plugged into an external monitor with power.
Right. Or even in laptop mode, there's an outlet somewhere. I don't find myself in the wilderness very often away from electricity. And even if I do, I have a 25,000 milliamp hour battery that can charge my iPad at 100 or 60 watts or whatever over USB connection. Like, I get wanting more battery life, believe me, but so far for me in my use case, 10 hours has been more than enough. I never run into that, oh, you're at 10%, better get the battery out. Like, it's just,
yeah.
I don't know, maybe I'm just really good at managing it myself and charging when I need to charge, but I would like more, but I'm not offended by the fact that they aimed for thinness and gave us a 10-hour battery life, because honestly, the design they've given us is so nice, I'm willing to make that trade-off.
Yeah. Something intriguing about the M4 is like it running cooler. I do wonder, like, that does sound really nice, because my M1, when I'm exporting LumaFusion or Ferrite, it can get pretty hot, and that's got to be not great for the battery, and I'd imagine this is probably better for battery longevity, having a cooler chip design in there.
Is it running cooler, or is it because the heatsink isn't underneath your hand anymore?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question.
I'll say it's both, honestly, because you do have that copper in the Apple logo, but having the SoC and all the compute processes happening in the center of the tablet, you're not holding the iPad by the center. I mean, unless you're holding it like a tray, right? But normally people would grab it by one side, and that's the edge of a battery case. So unless that battery's just getting really hot, yeah, it should be, technically speaking, running cooler to your hand. But I think they're just doing better with heatsink. They're distributing that heat with the heat being distributed from the copper and the Apple logo into the case from the center. It has more distribution paths throughout the case by spreading out from the center, allowing it so by the time the heat gets to the edges of the iPad, it's dissipated enough that it's not going to heat up the case completely. More uniform distribution, all of that. Like, it's just a better heatsink system. And I'm with, I think John Syracuse is the one who keeps beating this drum on ATP. Anytime Apple talks about improved cooling mechanisms, I'm here for it, because I feel like they forget that in a lot of their designs, and especially in a handheld computer, it's so important.
For sure. Well, is there anything we didn't cover that you'd like to before we wrap it up?
No, I just want to reiterate, I think between the iPad Pro and Vision Pro, iPad Pro is the future, and the future now, the future is now. All right. Like,
Yep.
This is a point I made in the iPad versus Vision Pro story. I recommend everyone go read that, because I had a lot of fun with that one. But Steve Jobs and the industry as a whole referred to iPad as post-PC as part of that era. And I think that's where we are right now. The iPad is truly the post-PC era. You can replace a Mac with an iPad as long as it fits your workflow. For some people, it doesn't. I understand that. But iPad is the representation of that future. I think it is what Steve Jobs wanted. And that pivot to iPad Pro in 2015 and where we are today is an evolution of that original concept. But I think with Vision Pro in existence, Vision Pro is a vision of the actual future, because ultimately, when you can create as many screens as you want within a field of view in front of your eyes, anything that's a physical display becomes irrelevant. So it's so funny that Apple has two competing products that will eventually fight to the death with the Vision Pro on top. But we're more than a decade out from Vision Pro being acceptable as that kind of computer. So today we have the iPad Pro, and for me, honestly, every time I pick it up in this new Magic Keyboard and look at this display, kind of like with the Vision Pro, it feels like I'm holding something that shouldn't exist today. It doesn't feel possible, and so for so many reasons. And I'm very excited to see what iPad OS and everything looks like in the future. And I hope that Apple is hearing our complaints and our requests, just at the very bare minimum. Two things. Let me record podcasts from iPad Pro, and Pixelmator Pro should be able to run on that platform. And honestly, I could probably just never touch my MacBook again.
Yeah.
That's how close I am to that.
Yeah.
I know other people are further away, but it just feels so silly that those are the kinds of things that we're waiting on at this point.
Yeah. Let's have Xcode run on this thing.
Yeah. Like go back to 2020 when I first started at Apple Insider, and I had a bridge keyboard that didn't have a trackpad and an external mouse with buttons programmed to different shortcuts. And that mouse was running the accessibility feature on iPad OS. And that's how I started my job at Apple Insider, was this little guy that could barely do what I needed it to do, but I forced it to because I believed in its future. And tell me then where I am today, and I wouldn't believe you. That iPad got an M4 processor before any Mac. That Apple's talking about it as the future of AI processes.
You're talking to the guy that had a Citrix X1 mouse, which was the very first made for iPad mouse that only worked with the Citrix and I think Jump Desktop or something.
So I wanted to end the show on a positive note. iPad is better than ever, and I think the only way from here is up. I'm really excited to see what they do next and come back on the show to talk about it.
Sounds great. Where can people follow you online and read your awesome writings?
Well, of course, I'm on Apple Insider. You'll see my name plastered to many articles, especially iPads and Vision Pro these days. But you can also find me on Mastodon. I'm usually there discussing different things about tech and video games. But you can always email me. My email is available at the top of every article I've written in the email button. It'll open a link direct to me. It's wes@appleinsider.com. If you want to make any private comments about the show or topics we've discussed or have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm available at any of those places. So
very cool. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been a great chat, and I've really enjoyed learning about an iPad I hope to own one of these days.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll find an excuse to dive in on the OLED and everything very soon. But yes, I'm happy. Thank you for having me. It was a very enjoyable conversation. Don't get to do this often on the other podcasts I do because they're more news-centric. So it's always nice to discuss a little bit more about workflows and my favorite computer. So there we go.
Well, that's my discussion with Wes all about the new M4 iPad Pro. My thanks again to Wes for his time recording. Make sure to check out Wes's articles about the new iPad Pro over at Apple Insider. And my thanks to you for your time and attention tuning in. As a reminder, you can support the show over at patreon.com/iPadPros or by subscribing in Apple Podcasts. With that, I'll talk to everyone again real soon.